yesterday, we got about 2/3 of the way, maybe a little less, maybe about 60%. And essentially what we have developed is we know the others are icy elves. They're magic icy elves. They seem to come from the trees. They might have a tie to the children of the forest. Even the show gave them a tie to the children of the forest. We don't expect it to be exactly the same in the books, but we've been picking up clues that the others are connected to the weirwoods and the children of the forest for years and years. Again, that's one of those predates my presence in the forums thing here. So we were just getting into some of the deeper stuff. We kind of covered all the basics. So if you happen to just be tuning in and you missed Iceberg 1, you're probably good to go just right in cold here. We did enjoy building up all the sort of first and second level observations. We got into some third level stuff. But today we're going to go deep. We're going to go for the bottom half of the iceberg. Definitely the stuff that's far under the water. But we were talking about Greenseer Kings. Brandon of the Bloody Blade is going to take us into the topic of Greenseer Kings. But basically the idea with Brandon of the Bloody Blade is that he's a son of Garth the Green, who sounds like a green man. So right there we have a reason that doesn't even have anything to do with the children of the forest for the Starks to have Greenseer genetics. It may come from Garth the Green and his son, Brandon of the Bloody Blade. And then we unpacked the sort of trivia around Red Lake, where it says, Brandon of the Bloody Blade killed so many children of the forest at Blue Lake, they renamed it Red Lake. And then separately, there's Rose of Red Lake, a different daughter of Garth, a different child of Garth, a daughter of Garth, who founded House Crane, a house of skinchangers at Red Lake. And so the whole thing is Barbie Dustin, right? She does this sexual metaphor with the Bloody Blade, talking about Ned's brother Brandon, where, he loved to hone his bloody blade, he loved the sight of the blood on the blade, and this and that. And it's very clearly talking about, like I said, a sexual metaphor. Barbie lost her virginity to Brandon, so that's the blood on the blade. So when it says Brandon of the Bloody Blade was killing children of the forest in this area, he might have been, of course, impregnating children of the forest. And then we find a skin changer house, Rose of Red Lake, in the same spot. Furthermore, Rose of Red Lake was originally Rose of Blue Lake. And blue roses are a Stark symbol, so it makes it even more likely that Rose of Red Lake's story has something to do with Brandon of the Bloody Blade, or that George is sort of just creating a myth about Starks descending from green men and then interbreeding with the children of the forest. So these are obviously shrouded in the fog of legend, and so we can't know the exact truth of any of this kind of stuff, but it's the sort of themes and the things that are being suggested. So Brandon of the Bloody Blade, he sounds like an ancestor of the Starks, and it's basically just telling you the Starks' origin has to do with the first men and all this stuff with green men and children of the forest. That's not really a surprise. And then, of course, the ancient Stark kings seem like skin changers, the ones in the crypts anyway. They've all got wolves at their sides, and we kind of know what that means. So, this is leading into one of my favorite topics, which is the Greenseer Kings of Ancient Westeros. And I did a series right after the show ended called King Bran. And the first one is Greenseer Kings of Ancient Westeros. And I've had a lot of fun with it. I definitely recommend that video. I think it still holds up. So the Greenseer Kings are everywhere. It's not just the ancient Starks. And of course, the ancient Starks in the north, we hear about them battling against the Warg King with all his Greenseers and beasts. So that's kind of a crazy story. It's a war for Sea Dragon Point, which is a peninsula in the far north. It's almost up to the wall. It's like near Bear Island and stuff. And essentially, we've got this idea of a wild warg king with Greenseers going to battle with him, and the ancient Starks defeated him. So this is almost certainly a warg king versus warg king fight, I would have to think. And the idea of Greenseers going to war raises an interesting question. How do Greenseers go to war? The only ones we've seen are they sit in caves tied to trees, all right? So this is one of the most interesting observations in the last Bran chapter. There's only 3 in A Dance with Dragons, but in the last one, he does his weirwood visions. He eats the weirwood paste. He sees a series of visions. Then they take him to his sleeping chamber. So the first visions, he sits on his weirwood throne and they give him the paste and he trips and he sees a bunch of stuff. Trips his little Stark nuts off, as I always like to say. Then they bring him back to his sleeping chamber, and as he's falling asleep and looking at the candle flame, he begins to have a second round of visions. And the interesting thing about this is that he's not sitting in his weirwood throne, but because he has wed the trees with the weirwood paste and stuff, He seems to be able to still see through the weirwood's eyes when he himself is not sitting in the throne. And this art, by the way, is by Dazed Da. And yes, it is awesome. I love this one. It is wonderful. And just to be clear, this is the oaken seat. Garth the Green, his firstborn son, Garth Gardner, sat on a living wooden throne called the oaken seat. So it kind of reminds us of Greenseer thrones, but it's not said to be in a cave. So we have to assume it's not in a cave. So it's a living wooden throne, but it's made of oak. This is standard Summer King, Winter King. Like I said, the weirwoods are very much in place of the holly tree, representing winter and death. The oaks are the tree of the Summer King, fertility and life and things like that. So we got Warg King and Marsh King. Like I said, how does he go to war with his Greenseers? Well, Bran shows us by showing us that once you've wed the tree, you can continue to use the tree, you can skin change the tree and see out of it, and presumably then skin change animals and whatever else, without sitting in the weirwood throne. Now, Bran, of course, doesn't have use of his legs, right? So he's not a warrior. But if Bran were Robb or Jon, and he was a Greenseer, think about what George is showing us. Bran could go to a weirwood cave, eat the weirwood paste. This is strong warrior Bran. Let's say Uncle Brandon, if you will. Could bond with the tree, eat the weirwood paste, and then leave the weirwood cave and continue to use the weirwoods as a spy network, to continue to use wolves and ravens. This is probably what Bloodraven did. He very well, before he ever went to the cave of the three-eyed crow, I mean, he very well may have been using his Greenseer powers, I would suspect. I'm not sure where he would get the weirwood paste, but the thing is, the children of the forest aren't confined to the north. Leaf went wandering in the realms of men for like 200 years. And then there's the ghost of Highheart. So I'm just sort of spitballing here, but I do think Bloodraven probably activated his Greenseer powers long before he went to that cave. And that's how he was using the spy network, essentially, and being the effective hand of the king that he is. Hashtag always listening. Kirsty, Blue Lake is in the Reach. I just had it up. I'll show you. It's halfway up the screen on the left side, Red Lake. So High Garden is Garth Central. And then just up the ocean road, you find Old Oak and the Shield Islands, where children of Garth the Green created great houses. And then Red Lake is close by. And Golden Grove is right there. So these are all houses founded by children of Garth, supposedly, according to legend. So the Greenseer Kings, they're a thing. If you don't have to be tied to the weirwood roots in a cave in order to use Greenseer magic, if you can go in and bond with the tree and leave again, now it makes sense to hear these stories about the Warg King going to battle with his beasts and Greenseers, right? These would be shaggy, burly, first man / wildling type warriors like Varamyr Sixskins, but stronger, going to war, and not only skin changing animals. And Greenseers, of course, have greater skin changing ability than normal skin changers, you'd have to think, but using the trees as a spy network. So this is a ferocious thing to think about, Greenseers and wargs becoming kings and warlords, but it is a thing. And as we look around ancient Westeros, we can see that it's actually everywhere. So Garth is the first king, and he's a green man. Then his children, his line of green kings, the Gardener Kings, they descend directly from him and sit on a living, weirwood, not weirwood, but an oaken throne. And then in the Godswood at High Garden, they have Garth planted 3 weirwoods, which grew together. So it's like they're called the 3 singers, I think. This is obviously a line of Greenseer kings, and at some point, perhaps they lose the ability, but they're still riding that image, right? Then we've got the Durrandon Kings. The Durrandon Kings are dressing up like green men. We don't know if they were originally Greenseers. I suspect so, because you find the stories of Durin Godsgrief warring on the children of the forest in the Rainwood, which could be the same as Brandon of the Bloody Blade, bloodying his blade against the children of the forest. And then Garth's son, the second Durin, supposedly gave the Rainwood back to the children of the forest. And then we hear of another one called King Durin the Raven Friend. So it seems like a lot of the Durrandon Kings may have actually been co-opted or become friends with the children of the forest. And that means those antlers, they may have been wearing those because they were partly green men, or they may have been growing them out of their heads originally, depending on what the green men really are and stuff. The Green Kings in the Reach, the Durrandon, the Starks, the Warg King that the Starks fought. Then there's a random legend about somebody called the Green King of the God's Eye. We don't know when he lived or what, but he obviously was either a Green Man King or somebody pretending to be a Green Man King, one or the other. And kind of the fact that people might be dressing up like Green Men Kings is proof that Green Men Kings were real. Because the fact that people would want to dress up like that to convey power and authority just tells you that this image is already associated with kings and godmen and things like that. Okay. Then we have the Marsh King. The Marsh King was the ancient Cranogmen, the mythical leader of the Cranogmen. You know, he rode on the lizard lion and, did war with various people. And the Starks defeated him, and then they made a pact. And then the Starks married the daughter of the Marsh King. And a lot of people always point to this and be like, oh, that's how the Starks got skinchanger genetics, from the daughter of the Marsh King. Because obviously the Cranogmen seem like they definitely have bred with the children of the forest. They're so short. Now, they could just be short because they live in a swamp and there's not a lot of healthy food to eat. And they've been living there for thousands of years and they just have become smaller, just sort of evolutionarily advantageous. As an evolutionary advantageous adaptation. That's what I was trying to say. So this Marsh King, like I said, a lot of people think that his daughter, that's how the Starks got the skin changer genes. But Brandon the Bloody Blade not only is implied as intermarrying with children of the forest, but he is a son of Garth. We don't know what that means, but Garth seems like either a green man or a Greenseer or something. You know, one of those things. So also the Starks, when they defeated the Warg King, they took prisoners and stuff and hostages. And I think it might even say something about his daughters or something. So it's a common thing, spoils of war. You steal the women. It's barbaric stuff. So here it is, another infusion of skin changer bloodlines. But really the bigger picture is that you see that they're everywhere. All the ancient first men seem to have clues about skin changing and green seeing and stuff. And like I said, Bran's Stream shows you how it would work. Like if you're not confined to the cave, these people would have become kings because they are literally the most powerful people around. And that brings us to not the most powerful person around. Varamyr Sixskins. He might be on Westeros' Biggest Losers. I'm plotting a stream, The Biggest Loser, where we talk about people like Chet. Just bitter bitches, total losers. Chet's right up there. Varamyr Sixskins is pretty pathetic. And nevertheless, even for a craven, selfish, like venal, grasping dude like Varamyr Sixskins, he is one of the most powerful people among the wildlings because he can skin change, as you can see, a snow bear, a shadow cat, 3 wolves, and some sort of bird. I forget. I think it's Orell's eagle that he's taken. And so this just shows you the power. Varamyr Sixskins, and this gets back into that whole thing with the first night and stuff. One of the reasons that the first night is in there, besides just being an abomination, is this idea that, oh, maybe it was a way that the others got a supply of babies. Well, the origins of the first night are undoubtedly revealed in Varamyr's story. Varamyr Sixskins uses his shadow cat to force women to come to his lair or cave or where the hell he lives and sleep with him. And by this means, the R word, which we don't say because it triggers a demonetization thing, but it is the R word. And Varamyr is sowing his seed. He is trying to have a child with the gift. And he talks about how frustrated he is that none of them have the gift. He's slept with tons of women. None of the children have the gift because it's rare. Depending on how strong the bloodlines are, it's probably less rare when the bloodlines are stronger. But in any case, this shows you the whole point of the first night. In ancient day, when the kings and lords were all skin changers and greenseers, they demanded the right to sleep with a woman on the first night of the wedding before the husband, just to take another shot at creating a magic baby so that the tribe has a Greenseer king for the next generation, or so the current Greenseer king can perpetuate his lineage. There's clues about this with the Boltons too, but I don't want to get too lost in the Boltons. But it kind of makes sense. In a barbaric way, you can see why the lords that were Greenseers and skinchangers would want to sow their seed as widely as possible. And this is why, it's supposed to be that, if the women were pregnant with the Lord's baby, then they considered it an honor. Well, it's because it's a magic baby. And in the least bad version of this idea, the idea is that the whole tribe or clan needs to produce a magic baby. And the one that is the current Greenseer obviously has the bloodline. So you'd want to, from a group perspective, have that person have as many kids as possible so that the tribe has a Greenseer king to lead them. Because if they don't, then they're weaker than the next tribe or clan. I'm not obviously justifying it, but just you can see how the logic lines up. So that's the origin of the first night. I think basically the Greenseer kings predate the others and the long night and all that crap. So this is where the tradition comes from. It is after the long night and whenever the others are created and knights, king and queen are doing their thing. Now this tradition of the first night that's producing all these unwanted pregnancies, these male babies, these are the ones that are given to the others. And so in this way, the first night is tied to both the other babies and the Greenseer kings. And it would make sense if Night's King, who found this magical ice woman, beyond the wall or in the north or something, and had others with her, if he in fact was a Greenseer king. And it really bugged me that the TV show, not to rag on the TV show again, but they showed us the guy who became Night King tied to a weirwood tree. And we always joke, George told them the Night King the others are tied to the weirwoods. And they're like, we'll tie the Night King to the weirwood. He's literally tied to So it implies that the weirwood magic may have been part of that transformation where they'd shoved a dragon glass thing in his heart and he turned into the Night's King. I don't think that's book canon as far as magic, but it was cool to watch. It was only frustrating that they didn't follow up on it. But the point isn't to rag on the show. The point is, even the show is imagining that Night's King, A, was created while backed up to a weirwood tree. And then we see that Bran, when he's wandering around in the weirwood net, can run into the Night King, who can see him in the weirwood net. And that implies that Night's King, the show Night's King I'm talking about, has Greenseer power, right? They didn't really go there and explain it, but you have to assume that he did. How else was he in Bran's weirwood net vision, right? I mean, maybe they didn't even think about it. And they're just like, well, if you look in the heart of winter, you can see you. But you can see how it's, the implications, right? Then there's the Targaryen incest, right? So the Targaryen incest is similar but different. It's also designed around magical bloodlines. But the idea is that the dragon bloodline, it's not a matter of 1 in 100 is a skinchanger and 1 in 1,000 is a Greenseer. It's not like that. They're just trying to keep the highest percentage of Valyrian blood as possible. But it's similar in that in a world with magic, George is re-examining the reasons why people would come up with customs. So in our own world, we have all kinds of ancient customs, and anthropologists and historians unpack and figure out what people were actually doing and enacting and stuff, what kind of symbolism they attach to these rituals. But in a world with magic, you have to re-examine everything. So all these traditions, we should look for magical reasons why they exist. It's why do people make blood sacrifice to the weirwoods? Well, there must be a reason. Bran can taste the blood of the sacrifice in the vision that happened thousands of years in the past or whenever it was. So in some sense, the weirwood is drinking that blood. Is that feeding the weirwood? Is that feeding the Greenseer? Is blood sacrifice to the weirwoods, does that somehow feed the others? There's a reason why the first scene we see in the Godswood is Ned cleaning his sword, and he's dipping the blood-dipped sword in the pond. So he's feeding the weirwood the blood from his... It's a hugely important scene. I should have made a slide for it. Let me pull up the picture, and we'll branch off into this for just a couple of minutes. So take a look at this picture. It really encapsulates it. The blood is dripping into the pond from Ned's sword, and Ned's sword is a Valyrian steel sword. So it's really seems like one of those ritualistic scenes where George is showing us an ancient ritual that people are repeating almost by accident. But it is... Ned going to the pond and doing this cleansing ritual is sort of a ritual. I mean, it's Catelyn basically describes it as that. So I'm not really reaching here to say that this is a ritualistic action. But I really think this is like last hero stuff here. Like, offering blood sacrifice to the weirwood with a dragon sword. It feels archetypal. We'll come back to this idea, but I really think that there's something here as far as, like, remember the last hero's sword broke, and then he has a sword of dragon steel. So somehow he reforged a sword or got a new sword. I would guess reforged. But what I'm saying here is, like, what is happening when blood sacrifice is offered to the weirwood? I just want to leave it as an open question for now. But it's clearly an important thing because the first men all did it. So we're talking about reasons why the others are invaded. Like, one of the theories about why the others have invaded is because the blood sacrifice to the weirwoods actually feeds the others. And when people stop doing it, they're not getting the blood. It's similar to offering babies to the others. Like, maybe the blood given to the weirwood tree is, straight mana for them. Because the others are connected to the weirwoods, guys. We're going to get to the ice spiders and all that. Let's see. Could we see visions or a mental battle between Night's King and Jon as Jon enters the weirwood net fully? I tend to think the spirit of Night's King will try to reach out to Jon. These are good questions. Also, if the reanimation power of the wights is a form of skin changing or connected to the trees, could Jon be resurrected by the knights? These are great questions. Thank you. And that was from Annie. And these are pretty much on topic. So I was just talking about the TV show where Night's King and Bran confront each other in the weirwood net. As soon as I saw that, it felt right to me. I had already been thinking about it, but when I saw it, I was like, yes, this is right. There isn't a leader of the Night's King, obviously, yet, but Greenseers should be able to see the others. Okay, now, the first clue about this is in Bran's coma dream. In Bran's coma dream, he's falling, right? Falling. And one of the things that he sees as he's falling are ice spires. And impaled on the ice spires are the bodies of other dreamers. So this is Bran's dream by Shark's Den. And at the bottom on the left, you see these ice spires and there's like skulls. So in the scene, it says the bodies of other dreamers, and they're impaled on the ice spire. So it's like, really, really sounds like, oh, Bran's at this crossing point where he can fly or die. The raven's like, fly or die. And he can see that if he doesn't fly, he's going to end up like the other dreamers, impaled on an ice spire. So other dreamers, and the impaled on ice spire too, that's like a transformation thing. Nissa was transformed by being stabbed by Lightbringer. You undo the others by stabbing them with dragon glass. So here, these dreamers that are impaled on ice spires, they sound just like what they sound like. Dreamers, meaning Greenseers, who took a wrong turn, who failed, who fell, and they became others. And so this is a clue that the others are green men or Greenseers or something like that, right? And then that symbolism is greatly enhanced at the Eyrie, where we have the moon door, which is a weirwood door. It's a form of execution. And when they push people out the weirwood door, they fall to their death, and they call it making people fly. So flying through the weirwood can also be falling to a cold death. And in the Eyrie, all the symbolism is icy. So you're being thrown out of an ice temple onto an ice mountain. Okay? So it's a really strong bit of symbolism with the other dreamers. And this is why blood sacrifice to the weirwoods might be feeding the others. And the lack of blood sacrifice to the weirwoods could be something that is making them pissed off, or could be the violation of an ancient pact. And we talked about the idea that maybe the last hero had to make a pact with the others to end the long night, which involved giving them babies. And that's why the Night's Watch sends babies through the Black Gate, which they might have been doing. And maybe that's why Alysanne shut down the Nightfort. So this is some of the stuff from yesterday. And this is by Sam Hogg. This is from the calendar. This is that big weirwood. Love the weirwood face on this one. Sad old weirwood. And again, I will remind you about this scene when Ned is talking about wildlings and Mance Rayder, and Catelyn says, there are darker things beyond the wall, which means the others, and she turns and looks at the weirwood. So George is telling us right from the beginning, weirwoods and White Walkers, white trees and White Walkers. So Varamyr's not a warg king, he's a warg baron. He's very much a petty lord, but he shows you what is possible. kind of. If somebody that's more powerful, maybe more kind and well-respected and better connected to people, or, I mean, you could take any character like Robert Baratheon or Jaime Lannister or Robb Stark or Ned and imagine them as a skinchanger king and think about how powerful they would be. So there can be different, it could have gone different ways. And the Starks, somehow the Starks earned the loyalty of the North and ruled the North for 8,000 years. And I don't think they did that purely through brutality. They definitely consolidated the North, and they definitely warred with the Marsh King and subdued different people. But they've stayed in power for 8,000 years for a reason. There's some magical stuff behind it, but one would guess they were pretty good warg kings. They probably were effective rulers. They kept the realm safe. And just until recent times, that was kind of the reputation. Like, the roads are safe when the Starks are strong in Winterfell. The wall will be kept strong if the Starks are strong. So we're going to get into some of the magic of Winterfell here in a bit. But last thing about this is when Varamyr sees Ghost, he says, now that is a second life fit for a king. And that's a clue about Jon being Rhaegar's son. But it's also a clue about warg kings. And Jon is going to be a warg king. He probably will end up king of the North. He'll be undead. But I do believe he'll still be able to use his magic, because Cold Hand seems to be able to still use his magic, as we talked about yesterday. And if anyone's doing timestamp, you can add something for a weirwood blood sacrifice if you want to do that. So next we have, going back to Night's Queen. Night's Queen is on here like 3 times, because every time we learn more information about the others, it causes us to circle back to the mystery. This art is by Julia Boehm, and she made it for our channel. So I am very grateful for it, and it is awesome. And it captures a certain idea that I want to develop here, which is the idea of Night's Queen as, again, an ice sorceress, somebody who is basically exploring magic. Like Melisandre, I mean, her upbringing is a little dark as far as being a slave to the Red Temple and stuff, but she basically, you can see that she loves sorcery. She loves fire magic. She's dedicated her whole life to it, having the visions in the flames, seeking out the prophesied Azor Ahai reborn. This is what she loves. It's what she does. And she is on a mission, unlike anyone else in the story, of exploring fire magic as a concept, seeing how far she can take it, transforming her body to where she doesn't have to eat and barely needs to sleep. She's completely given herself to R'hllor, which means fire magic. So Night's Queen, it's easy to imagine her as a similar figure. And with all these Childs of the Forest connections, with the idea that the other speech is like the cracking of ice on a winter lake, and the children's voices sound like water over, a babbling brook over stones, the idea that the others are green man spirits in some way, it just makes you think, Night's Queen, was she a human elf hybrid? Or was she a child of the forest who tapped into ice magic and sort of went her own way? Was she more a victim? Is Night's King capturing her and forcing her against her will to use sorcery? It doesn't really sound like that's the story, but we never know. But she sounds like the first person to ever use ice magic, especially if the timeline is such that I think it is, where Night's King and Queen lived during the Long Night and not after. Because we've never seen any other female others. And why are the others getting male babies if they have female others? They'd be able to breed if they had female others. They need babies to sustain themselves or make new others, because that's the only way they can reproduce. That's pretty easy to see. So the thing about Night's Queen is that she may be a Stark. It is said that Night's King may have been a Stark. And Night's Queen sounds like an other. She's actually called the Corpse Queen, as we discussed, but probably not a corpse herself, but rather the queen of corpses, a necromancer, sorcerer. But I think that she was a Stark. And Night's King himself may not have been a Stark. That is kind of what I think is going on. And the reason why is going to be in the next slide, but I just want to throw the idea out. I will tell you why in a second. But it kind of makes sense. It's like, if there are humans in the North intermarrying with children of the forest, tapping into weirwood magic that becomes ice magic, like, who would that be? Probably a Stark. Isn't that why the Starks have all this icy symbolism, and we see Lyanna with her blue rose crown, like a winter halo? like a cold version of the May Queen, But yeah, there's more. I'll get to that in the next slide. Last idea, Night's Queen might be the weirwood tree itself. Because if you think about it, it's like the White Walkers come out of the weirwoods, but the White Walkers are also the children of Night's Queen. So is Night's Queen a weirwood? Nissa Nissa has symbolism that overlaps so strongly with the weirwood. I've basically come to conclude that she is a child of the forest who, when murdered by Azor Ahai, goes into the weirwood net and becomes part of the weirwood net, so that the tree is Nissa Nissa. And all the Nissa Nissa women look like trees. So I think that I don't think that she necessarily is a tree, but let me just go to the next slide. This is really where the rubber meets the road. So this is about archetypes. You guys are mostly familiar with archetypes, but just to make sure everyone's on the same page. George R.R. Martin, the word archetype is usually used in combination with Jungian. So Carl Jung, philosopher, came up with the concept of archetypes. And George explains it with the faith of the seven. Okay? So Septon Maribald talks about the cobbler. He prays to the cobbler above. And I think it's Pod Payne. He's like, there is no cobbler. And he's like, well, it's the smith. The smith is a craftsman. He's a worker. He's a cobbler. He's a stable hand. He's anybody who is doing work. And that's the archetype, is the worker. That's the smith. The warrior is also an archetype. And that's why when Catelyn looks at the face of the warrior in the Sept, she sees Robb's face and Jaime's face, but also Arya's face and Brienne's face, because they're warriors too. And so even though they're not men, they fit the archetype of the warrior, because the archetype is a type of person, if you will. Life has these familiar eddies, all around the world, all through time. There are warriors, there are craftsmen, there are priests, there are midwives. It's just how humans work, right? So in A Song of Ice and Fire, George is doing mythical archetypes. So the Green Man is an archetype, and we see Robert and Renly acting like the Green Man, representing summer and bounty, laughing, sleeping around, all that stuff. So Knights, King, and Queen are archetypes. And so we see characters in the story who act like Knights, King, and Queen. And we've already talked about Stannis and Mel in the first stream. And I said that Melisandre is like a hot version of what Night's Queen does. She takes Stannis' seed and soul and life fires and makes shadow children, just as Night's Queen takes Night's King's seed and soul and has white shadow children. So cold womb, white shadows, hot womb, black shadows. But it's roughly parallel. And then Stannis, as well as his face being etched in shadow and his eyes being as blue as a midnight sea and things like that. He's got midnight black hair. He goes and then declares that he takes the Nightfort as his seat. And that's like really putting a flag on it, like the Nightfort, where the Night's King ruled. And then we have this guy Stannis marrying a Night's Queen type woman, but hot, and then going to the Nightfort. And there's a lot more to it. Check out Night's King Azor Ahai. This is the video. But the point is to identify the archetypal pairings. So Stannis and Mel are one. Stannis, by the way, currently invading from the north with a bunch of northern warriors dressed up like trees. And he's coming down on Winterfell from the north. So that's kind of like a Night King echo right there. That's what the others do. They invade from the north. And they're tree warriors, you see? So Rhaegar and Lyanna. And this is Pro Crick's artwork here. Fabulous artwork. Slightly stylized, but super intense, very emotional. Love this one. And so these Rhaegar and Lyanna are acting like Knights, King, and Queen. Namely, Rhaegar is said to have abducted Lyanna, right? And Knights King says he saw the beautiful Night's Queen beyond the wall and chased her and caught her and loved her and made her his queen. The story goes that Rhaegar chased Lyanna somewhere around the Trident and abducted her and then took her back to the Tower of Joy. And maybe they got married, which would make her queen after Aerys died. I forget the timing, princess or queen, depending on. But Lyanna's, I just mentioned the blue winter rose crown. It's like, it's the lunar halo. I mentioned a cold version of the May Queen with the whole Rhaegar's lance being like the maypole. But Rhaegar, damn it. Try not to say that. Rhaegar, not only does he abduct this Winter Queen, when they run on, of course, he doesn't really abduct her. I'm pretty sure they were in love, or at the very least working together, with a similar understanding of prophetic need. I think it was both. I should do a whole video about my views on Rhaegar and Lyanna. The point is, Rhaegar always wears night black armor. It's a specific description of him. Night black armor. He abducts this Winter Queen. And when they run off originally, there's this cold snap where it had been getting warmer, but then it gets really cold and it snows in King's Landing and the Blackwater Rush freezes. So it's like, it snows for, it's either a fortnight or a moon's turn. I forget. Probably a fortnight, I would guess. But I covered all this in my Moons of Ice and Fire, Rhaegar and Lyanna. I think it's How to Make an Ice Dragon. It's the 5th one. I think it's Moons of Ice and Fire 5, r+L = Ice Dragon. It's 2 hours of all of Rhaegar and Lyanna's symbolism, but trust me, this is a Night's Queen and King pairing. And when Rhaegar abducts Lyanna, quote unquote, winter falls suddenly and aggressively for like a month. Just for symbolism's sake. That's the only reason it happens. Okay. And then Lyanna, if she parallels Night's Queen, her children should be like the others, right? Melisandre has black shadows for children, and that parallels the others because the others are white shadows. Who is Lyanna's son? It's Jon Snow. A snow baby. Okay, so that's very much a child that should be given to the others or is named after Jack Frost or however you want to say it. Jon Snow is a snow child. That's what you expect to come from Night's Queen. I'll also point out about Lyanna that she was the Knight of the Laughing Tree, where she herself turned into a weirwood warrior. So the children of Night's Queen are weirwood warriors in some sense. Those are the others. Or potentially the last hero, who may be the child of Night's Queen. We'll get there. I'm getting ahead of myself. So Rhaegar and Lyanna are important. Then Jon Snow himself turns around and does it too. He has Night's King symbolism when he goes north of the Wall, specifically when he's sent north to kill Mance Rayder. He's being lowered into a dark abyss, his name forever shadowed. Just like Night's King's name is forgotten and erased. He obviously leads the Watch, but is accused of breaking all his vows, just like Night's King. He goes beyond the Wall and falls in love with 2 women. He does it with Ygritte. And then there's this ritualistic scene with Val. Val is the more important Night's Queen symbol by far. And let me explain, because Ygritte's mostly doing Nissa stuff with her kissed by fire hair. That's the clue. So the scene is with Val. It's when Val is gone for 2 weeks trying to find Torment. And she comes back. It's this really awesome scene where Jon's wolf ghost goes to Val, and Jon says, "Are you trying to steal my wolf?" But his wolf is named Ghost. So this is implying, Jon as a Night's King figure giving his ghost to Night's Queen. Are you trying to take my ghost? Night's Queen took Night's King's seed and soul. So it's very similar. And in that scene, Val is north of the Wall. So is Jon. He's just standing like right in front of the Wall. He's not on top, but close enough. And he's thinking about how beautiful she is as she walks out of the haunted forest and tries to steal Jon's ghost. So it's a great little ritual scene that implies them as Night's King and Queen. And then there's also a sense in which Jon has stolen Val in the wildling tradition by putting her up in the tower. She's also up in a tower guarded by a giant Woon, where Lyanna was up at the Tower of Joy, guarded by 3 Kingsguard who symbolize others. So Jon and Val, a Night's King and Queen, and then there's a alternate future that Jon turns down, right? Stannis offers Jon the chance to become Jon Stark, Lord of Winterfell. And he's going to make Jon Lord of Winterfell. And he would then marry Val and make Val the Lady of Winterfell. And their children would be Starks. So this is a Night's Queen and King pairing that, in this scenario, become Lady and Lord of Winterfell. And their children are the Starks. Not only that, but in this scenario, Jon imagines that baby Monster, Gilly's baby, who was supposed to be given to the others, could be fostered at Winterfell and raised as a brother of him and Val's child. So we're going to foster the stolen other baby at Winterfell, while I, Jon, a symbolic Night's King, marry a symbolic Night's Queen and have Stark children that are symbolic others. Okay? You see why when you unpack the symbolism, it really starts to seem like the bloodline of the others is in the Stark bloodline somehow. And I'm going to tell you how. We're almost there. And then last one, Aegon and Visenya. Aegon is a Night's King. He has the dragon, mostly for his symbolism. His armor is black too, and he has a black sword, but it's his dragon. Balerion the Black Dread, whose wings bring night and shadow and cover everything in darkness. Okay. Lyanna's Ice Queen symbolism, Visenya. Her Ice Queen symbolism is fantastic. Vhagar is named after the star Vega, which is very close to the northern pole star and Draco. And Draco is obviously a dragon constellation that wraps around the North Star. That's where George got the idea for his Ice Dragon constellation, which contains his pole star. So Vega it's also a blue star. Vega is a big blue star. So Visenya Draconis is the episode where you can find it's some of the coolest symbolism, but I just don't want to get lost on a tangent. But it has to do with the pole star and Vega and Draco and a lot of cool astronomy and the like I said, the hill of Visenya. And the main thing about Visenya that we need to understand today, Visenya creates things that symbolize the others. So she creates the Kingsguard, who symbolize the others, and I'll talk about that in a second. And she does that by cutting the cheek of King Aegon. And by making this example of him, she's like, oh, you're not safe. You're not protected well enough, because look how easily I cut you. But of course, Night's Queen took Night's King's seed and soul to make white shadows. And so here Visenya symbolically cutting Aegon's cheek, taking his blood with her sword, which is a magical way to draw blood, and then using that as leverage to create the Kingsguard who symbolize the others. Similarly, on Visenya's hill, eventually is created the Sept of Baelor, and out of the white marble, snowy-looking Sept of Baelor comes the warrior's sons, who wear mirror armor like the others, and whose sigil is a crystal sword on a field of black. And of course, the others have literally swords of crystal that only come out at night and thus are seen on a field of black. So, Visenya is a mother of the others figure, just as all the other Night's Queen figures are. And what I was saying a minute ago, let me see if I should go out of order or keep going. Yeah, okay. We'll talk about the Tower of Joy next. So this art is by Mike Miller on top and Florian Beige on the bottom. And the top one's from the graphic novel. Did I already do the Kingsguard and the others? I feel like that one got lost. It was on the original list, but it didn't make it into the Photoshop list. Okay, so let me pause and do this real quick, because it's complementary to the Tower of Joy. It goes with it. But basically, it has to do with white, the term white shadow. That's where it starts. The Kingsguard have 7. The others, what we see in the prologue, have 6. And like I said, they seem to be looking for a leader who would be the 7th. So the Kingsguard, 7 white knights that are described as white shadows. The others are 6 looking for a 7th, who are white shadows and pale shadows. The Kingsguard are described, their armor looks like snow and ice in different scenes. Barristan's armor looks hard as ice. Their standard is a snow white field, so snow on a field. That even gives you the idea of snow covering up the green, like green men turning into ice men. And they're also ghostly. They get ghostly descriptions quite a bit. In the moonlight specifically, Sir Mandon Moore guarding the Red Keep looks... His white steel armor, he's a white shadow whose white steel armor looks ghostly in the moonlight. So all the language used to describe the Kingsguard is the same language as the others. And I just said Aegon is a Night's King figure, as is Rhaegar, wearing their black armor. And so now you have this Night's King figure with Night's Queen creating the others to protect the king. And that sort of makes sense. Night's King bound his brothers with strange sorceries and had white shadow babies with the Night's Queen. Or is that part of the same idea? I don't know. I do know, but I'm not going to get there yet. But the point is, the idea of Aegon, the Dragon King, all in black, representing the Night's King, guarded by white shadows, like that's kind of makes sense. That's kind of what the others are. They're like a Kingsguard for a Night's King and Queen that we just haven't seen yet. And so this white shadow language is really key because it's applied only to those things, the Kingsguard and the others, and then one time to Ghost and one time to Weirwood, which are both important. And so, yeah, they're white shadows. And so at the Tower of Joy, Ned and his men are described as gray wraiths. And that's interesting. Gray wraiths. Because the Night's Watch are symbolically undead, and Jon and Cold Hands are undead. So you got these dark gray wraiths, and you can see it in the lower image with Florian Beige. It really does look like the Night's Watch versus the others. And up in the tower is Night's Queen Lyanna with her snow baby, Jon Snow, and they're guarded by the others. Like, that makes sense. The whole setup makes sense. And so here comes Ned Stark, like the last hero, with the Night's Watch at his back. He defeats the others, and then what does he do? He rescues a baby, an other baby, and he brings it back to Winterfell and raises it as a Stark, as his son. A bastard Stark, but still a Stark. So we've seen this pattern before. Gilly is a Night's Queen parallel figure because she's popping out babies that are given to the others, just like Night's Queen did. Also, the Gilly flower is a blue flower. So one of Gilly's babies that's supposed to be given to the others is rescued by a heroic Night's Watchman, Sam Tarly, who, by the way, is a last hero figure. He's the 13th member to make it back from Craster's to Castle Black, just like the Night's Watch last hero had 12 companions. So Sam is a very strong last hero figure, and he rescues a baby from a Night's Queen figure and brings it back south of the wall. And then later, like I said, Jon imagines that maybe he'll foster it at Winterfell. So the idea of fostering monster at Winterfell is very much a parallel to Ned collecting Jon from the Tower of Joy after defeating others, symbolic others, and bringing that baby home to raise as a Stark. So how did the blood of the others get into the Starks? It was the last hero. When he defeated the others, or Knights King and Queen or whatever, he must have rescued one of those babies. That might have been his brother or cousin, quite frankly, if either Night's King or Queen was already related to the Starks. And then your last hero, who's suggested as a brother of Night's King, could also be his son. I think the last hero essentially rescued this other baby and brought it home to be a Stark. But there are some permutations of that idea as well. So there's definitely some family relationships here. There are some crossed bloodlines, but this begins to explain why the Starks seem so tied to the others, why they are responsible for holding down the North, why there's always must be a Stark in Winterfell. Like, they're the keepers of some sort of connection to the others. It could be a pact. It could be just a thing where they are the opposite forces that are maintaining an equilibrium, But they're the blood of the other, just like the Targaryens are the blood of the dragon. I'm quite convinced. And that is the pattern. It's all about stealing a baby from Night's Queen. So it appears over and over. All the Night's Queen figures, or not all of them, but a lot of them have this baby theft thing. One of the best ones is Alanis Harlaw, whose baby boy, Theon, that's what she calls him, my baby boy, is stolen by the Starks. And then when Asha Greyjoy goes to see her mother, she's described as a cold corpse over and over. She's a husk, she's a shadow, she's ghostly, all this Night's Queen, Corpse Queen language is applied to her. And her baby was stolen by the Starks. So the Starks seem to like to rescue other babies, and that's how they got that bloodline. Now, the other important observation about the Tower of Joy in terms of symbolism are the blue eyes of death that are watching in the sky. It said a storm of rose petals blew across a blood-red sky, as blue as the eyes of death. So there's a lot of wordplay. A storm of rose petals blew, B-L-E-W, blew across the sky as blue as the eyes of death. So I almost read this poetically like a storm of rose petals, B-L-U-E, a storm of rose petals blew. That could be like a song. But the point is, the blue eyes of death are very clearly a reference to the others. The others have blue star eyes. They are the eyes of death. Under a Blood Red Sky is a U2 song. That's cool. That's funny. The blue eyes of death are in the sky watching the Tower of Joy. It's all but implying that the others are looking in on the scene, that they are watching for Jon Snow, that it is the birth of Jon Snow, who is of the bloodline of the Starks. That's who they're watching for. That's when they start moving in. If the others are watching the Tower of Joy, and that's what the symbolism suggests, then it means they're watching for Jon's birth. It means that Jon's birth is a significant event to the others. So just as he's the prince that was promised to people who are looking for Azor Ahai reborn, the others probably have their own version of that prophecy. They are also watching the stars, and they are watching for the signs, for the comets, for the birth of the prince that was promised. And I think that Jon is the prince that was promised to the others, in the sense that if the Starks stole a baby from the others and claimed it as a Stark, then the others are kind of owed a baby. And we saw they came after Gilly's baby. Remember, when they fled, the other chased them, and Gilly's like, they've come for the baby. And the other came with wights. Did the other pop out of the weirwood tree? I don't know, but he appeared right next to it, so I'll just say that. But yeah, the others want their babies that they're owed. And if they're stolen, they might come and get them. And so Jon Snow, that's the whole meaning of the prologue scene that we talked about, where the others are testing Waymar to see if he can pass the test. And I was saying, Jon Snow would pass the test, and they'd try to make him a new Night's King. That's why they want to reclaim him, because he, as the prince that was promised, is like probably the only one who can be a new Night's King. And it could be, to an earlier question, that the spirit of the original Night's King is in the weirwood net somewhere and wants to be reborn, like in Iluki from Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, which is a major, which is a major influence for George. Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. There's an Azor Ahai-like ancient wizard who is in the astral plane, and he body snatches someone to be reborn. And so that could be what's going to happen if the others can get Jon. And that's why they're watching for his birth at the Tower of Joy. This is my thinking. These are my theories here. And that brings us to Jon's body, which is going to get stole by the others. And this image is by Daniel Bernal Imaginante. I used it for my Lord Snow video. It's a great piece of art. And essentially, the idea here that many people, there's a few different arts of Jon Snow as a Night's King, and it's just not hard to see. His name is Jon Snow, and yeah, the others might want him for a sunbeam or an unsunbeam. Gonna get stole. His body is in the snow right now, and they're probably going to put it in the ice cells. That's kind of been foreshadowed. And so the others, I think, are going to come and steal it from the ice cells. They're going to reanimate it with blue star magic. And Jon will essentially lead the invasion of the others through the wall. And I think they need him to do this. The symbolism is off the hook for this. There is a chapter. It's the second chapter where Jon lets the wildlings through the wall. There's two where he lets wildlings pass through the wall. It's the second one that's heavy. The wildlings are spelled out as others 9 ways from Sunday. And 7 times in the chapter, they're literally called others. Others looked at him like long-lost brothers. Others threw Jon cold glances. Like, it's ridiculous. It's one of the strongest symbolism chapters to be found. And I think we still need to do a reread of it. So if Jon's body snatched, it might not make him the Night's King, but I think it will. I mean, that's kind of the point. Jon is foreshadowed as a king. He's blood of the dragon. He's a skin changer. Might be blood of the other. I mean, it just seems like they're not just going to make him a wight. Like, Jon's very special. Not only that, Jon is tied to the fall of the wall very strongly. Every time he sees it, he's like, it's the end of the world. And if it ever fell, the world would fall with it. He thinks about it all the time, but sometimes the weight of all that ice above his head made it feel like it was pressing down on you, about to crush you, over and over and over and over. Jon thinks about the wall falling and how it's the end of the world. Then there's the dream where he dreams about the moon screaming at him with the raven's voice of Mormont's raven, and the moon is screaming, snow, 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 aggressively. And then as Jon wakes, the moon raven lands on his chest with a thump, almost as if the moon had fallen out of the sky and hit Jon. Then Jon picks up his pillow, which is a feather pillow. He throws it at the raven, misses. He hits the wall, and it explodes in a flurry of feathers. A flurry of white feathers exploding when Jon threw something, a pillow, at the moon raven, and he hit the wall. And then there was a flurry of feathers filled the room like a snowstorm. So it's pretty I mean, if you get into Ice and Fire symbolism, this shit is not hard. Like, this is not hard to interpret. The moon is going to fall out of the sky, it's going to knock over the wall, and it's going to create a snowstorm, and that is going to be tied with Jon waking up, which is exactly what he's doing in that scene, waking up. So Jon resurrecting, either being stolen by the others or maybe being freed from the others' bondage, will certainly be timed with the fall of the new long night. And once the others have stolen Jon's body and the wall has broken, then they will be able to lead the invasion of Westeros. And it will be Jon leading them. I swear to God, it will be. And he might not be freed until he gets to Winterfell, but we'll see. Maybe they'll get him at Castle Black. So that's Wallfall. And then finally, Jon's Azor Ahai dream. He is manning the wall with his blade burned red in his fist. He is slaying wildlings that sound like others. They scuttle up the ice like spiders. And it said he's armored in black ice, but his blade burned red in his fist. So what's armored in black ice mean? There's two main ideas about it. This is Guillermo Pongalupi. This is Jon defeating wights at the wall. So his blade burns red in his fist. That sounds like Lightbringer. That's easy. The red sword of heroes, fire sword. But he's armored in black ice. Now, this could be Valyrian steel armor because Euron has Valyrian steel armor. And Jon's dad, or uncle really, Ned, he is his dad. He raised him. That makes him his dad. It's ask a foster kid, you know. But Ned's black sword is called ice. So black ice is Valyrian steel in the case of Ned's sword. So black ice could be Valyrian steel, but it could be ice. Jon being a Night's Watchman in black and, you know, corpses having black hands and shit, being armored in black ice might imply that Jon's body is cold whited, just like cold hands, whose hands are black and hard and cold, almost like armor. And he's wearing blacks. So maybe that's what armored in ice means, is that Jon's body will first be frozen by the others, but then later freed from enchantment. Obviously, he won't stay an other forever. He'll be freed from enchantment, probably a combination of Melisandre and Bloodraven and Bran or something, weirwood and fire magic. But his body will probably still be cold. He'll have like some inner fire. He'll be an ice and fire zombie. Like, I just really think that's coming. And that's what this vision sounds like to me. Armored in ice with a blade that burns red in his fist. So we'll see. But it could mean whitification. And there's also Bran's vision of Jon growing cold and hard, and the memory of all warmth fleeing from him could easily sound like cold whiting. So, also when Jon sees Jafer and Othor, he's like, my uncle's men. He's like, I'm such a green boy. If I had gone out there, that could be me. It's a great line. So it's like, yeah, green boys of the Night's Watch sometimes can get turned into others. And maybe that'll happen to Jon. So black cold hands might be good to wield a fire sword. The thing is, cold hands is afraid of the fire. So cold hands is not compatible with fire. So I'm not sure how that's going to work with an ice zombie, freeing him with fire. What's it going to end up looking like? Maybe he'll look like a weirwood tree, kind of wrinkled and stuff. Dana's going to think that's hot. Let me get Urtak's, his weirwood resurrected Jon. Oh, where is it? See, Urtach is so, Airtouch. Sorry. I learned how to say his name wrong. I'm backsliding. Airtouch. He has a very good instinct, and all of his art is symbolic, and he seems to tap into this stuff. That, as we talked about when I had him on. If you missed that, another great stream that did go under the radar, I did about 6 months ago with Airtouch Altanaz, and we went through all of his ice and fire art like this, and we talked about some of the theory crafting that he's actually doing through the art. So look at Jon. Above him is Night King. Show Night King, obviously. Airtouch very much likes to take the stuff on the show and try to wed it to the book canon or speculate how the book canon might go. So that's the spirit of this artwork. It's a little speculative. He did this before the end of the show as well, I should point out, before we knew how it would end. And we had hopes that the show would end more like the books. But you can see that Jon, he's covered in ice, but he's like breaking out of it. And underneath, he looks like a weirwood. He's got the white, wrinkled skin of someone maybe who's been resurrected, right? And his eyes are red. So he would look more like his wolf ghost, being white with red eyes and white hair. And of course, my theory about Jon's resurrection is that the spirit of Ghost the Wolf will have merged with Jon's spirit, and that merged Wolfman spirit is what's going to be ported back into Jon's body. So Ghost will be riding shotgun in Jon's consciousness. Will be merged. That's why the wolf is named Ghost. So if Jon ends up looking like Ghost, that would make sense. He'd also then look like Elric of Melniboné with the white hair and red eyes and look like a younger Bloodraven. So I think this is the way it's going to go. And I also do have hope that Jon will actually be resurrected and not just a wight. And that, I didn't include a slide for this, but that would be a weirwood resurrection. It's one of those really pregnant lines. Bran in his weirwood vision sees Ned. And it's his first weirwood vision, so he's not quite understanding that he's seeing the past. And he comes back and he's like, I saw him. He's alive. My dad is alive. I saw him. And Leaf is like, do not attempt to call back the dead from death. What you saw was a vision of the past. And it's like, he didn't say he was going to try to resurrect his dad. He's confused about what he saw. But Leaf proactively is like, whatever you do, don't try to resurrect the dead. So can Greenseers resurrect the dead? Probably. Or else you'd not warn against doing it. So it's probably, just like anything else with magic, it comes with risk, it comes with a cost. Maybe resurrecting the dead with Greenseer magic is part of what caused some of the problems the first time or whatever. But Bran is probably going to try to help resurrect Jon. Or Bloodraven. One or the other. Or both. I could see Bloodraven giving up his last to resurrect Jon. But otherwise it will be Bran. So you might have fire magic from Mel to counteract the ice magic of the others. Or maybe Mel's going to sacrifice Ghost and push the spirit back into the body. But if there's a Greenseer resurrection, and this is the point, it may be that we can do better than just a wight. It could be that Greenseers can actually restore Jon to life. They are trees full of blood. Maybe they can pump Jon full of weirwood blood, symbolically or literally. And maybe Jon can be resurrected, and skin that's been dead and frozen and then like sort of re-fleshed, like it might look all wrinkly like a weirwood tree. I'm sort of vamping here, but there you go. That's Jon and his resurrection, and I've got one more slide on Jon, and that is this one. This is more air touch, both of these. So, of course, there is lots of foreshadowing for Jon becoming a fire wight. So somehow, we know some R'hllor magic is going to be involved. And Mel's right there talking about making a shadow with Jon and how long Jon's shadow is and all this stuff. So the obviously advantage of fire wights is that fire wights can light their own swords on fire. This is true in the books and the show. We see Beric do it in both. He just prays to R'hllor. He doesn't need to kill a Nissa to get a flaming sword. He's already R'hllor powered. He just lights it. And then he's got a flaming sword. So if you had 12 Berics north of the wall helping the last hero, they'd all have flaming swords. They do pretty well. We saw Beric and Thoros with flaming swords. This art was speculative. They imagined maybe Dollar said would get one too. But you can see on the upper one, Beric and, not Thoros. That looks like Tormund, actually. But anyway, you saw Thoros and Beric lighting their swords on fire north of the wall. It was pretty kick-ass. It was like, yeah, this makes sense. Here's a purpose for a flaming sword, right? And it's part of the Lightbringer myth. So now you're thinking, maybe Lightbringer wasn't one sword. Maybe Lightbringer is just a description of all the flaming weapons that were used against the others. Whether those being flaming dragonglass knives and swords, or, Valyrian steel or proto-Valyrian steel. Now, the thing about the fire wights is Beric and Bloodraven and the Scarecrows. It's a three-way symbolism parallel. So let me see if I can spit this out easily. So Beric is a fire wight. He's the first one that we see. When we meet him, he's not only a fire wight, he's a fire wight who lights his sword on fire, which reminds us of Lightbringer, but he's living in a weirwood cave. So what is an Azor Ahai person, a resurrected, fire-magicked Azor Ahai person, doing living in a weirwood cave? And he's not only living in a weirwood cave, his first scene, he comes down from a tangle of roots up high in the cave, just like a weirwood nest. So he's not a Greenseer, but as much as George can, he's implying him as somebody who sits in a weirwood throne. So that got me thinking, did Azor Ahai sit in a weirwood throne? Was he a Greenseer, or did he become a Greenseer somehow? Now, if you look at Beric, he also reminds you of Bloodraven quite a bit. They've both got one red eye. Beric wears a faded black cloak, just like Bloodraven. Beric lives in a weirwood cave, just like Bloodraven. And Bloodraven, by the way, has Dark Sister, a Valyrian steel sword, so not a flaming sword, but a similar symbol. The Scarecrow is the thing. Arya calls Beric the Scarecrow Knight a couple of times because he's so thin and haggard, right? Well, Bran calls Bloodraven a Scarecrow as well. And then we have the actual scarecrows that the Night's Watch makes. They make fake Night's Watchmen, remember? They put him atop the wall and atop Castle Black's towers. And then, in Jon's Azor Ahai dream, his friends are gone. The only people around him are the Scarecrow Knights. He says, my friends have all abandoned me. So just like the last hero, his companions are gone. And the Scarecrows got named after fallen brothers. So they represent dead Night's Watchmen. And in Jon's dream, they are burning. They are burning Scarecrow brothers. So they're dead Night's Watchmen who are like scarecrows that are on fire. Beric is a scarecrow animated by fire magic. Bloodraven is a scarecrow who is a Night's Watchman with a dragon sword. Okay? So these Scarecrow Knights strongly that are Jon's companions when he's doing his Azor Ahai dream really tells you. It's like, oh, the original Azor Ahai or last hero might have been accompanied by 12 fire wights. And it says his companions died. So all that's missing is for them to be resurrected. And that gets back to the story of the last hero who was helped by the children of the forest. Remember, his friends die. He's hounded by the others. His sword breaks. His dog and his horse die. Everything is bad. Then the story is interrupted, and later we learn that the children helped the last hero. That's the part of the story Bran fills in. And we also learn that the children helped the first men of the Night's Watch rally to fight the others. And there's this picture of the last hero with dragon steel and companions. So his old companions are dead. Now he's got new companions and dragon steel. So were those companions, the new ones, the same as the old ones? And when the children helped him mysteriously, maybe they just helped resurrect those companions. So much like Jon, I'm saying there might have been a weirwood component and a fire component to their reanimation. Maybe they were already weirwood magic users, like Jon is a skinchanger and Cold Hand seems to have been a skinchanger before they died. So it's some mix of fire magic and Greenseer magic that creates the green zombies. That's what is spelled out. And then finally, the King of Winter symbolism, which I did a whole stream called The King of Winter. And that will explain it in all detail. But the very short version is that the name King of Winter, which is what the ancient Stark kings were called, is taken from European folklore, and it's a variant of Green Man folklore. There was a custom of taking your extra stalks and leaves and shoots from the harvest, the stuff you didn't use, like the stalks the corn grew on, right, that you'd throw away as waste. And you take some of those dead, dry shoots, and you make a little straw man, he's green still. But through the winter, he turns, brown or whatever as all the shoots die. So he turns into is a green man that turns into a straw man. And then for Beltane, or Beltane, or Beltina, or how you say it, you burn the green man. He's called the King of Winter because he reigns all winter long. He's a dead green man made of green shoots called the King of Winter. And in the spring, you burn him to celebrate the end of winter and the coming of spring. That's the King of Winter tradition. It's also similar to the Wicker Man, which is also burnt, okay, in the spring or the summer. So George naming the Starks Kings of Winter is kind of implying that they are green men who become dead and who light themselves on fire to bring the spring. And that is Jon Snow's story. He is going to be named King in the North, which is just King of Winter. He is a skin changer, meaning a Greenseer magic user, a green man, a skin changer man, who dies, is going to get resurrected as a fire wight. So he'll be a burning man, a burning scarecrow, and he will help end the winter and bring in the spring. So the King of Winter mythology strongly implies fire wight Jon. No, I do think there'll be 12 companions. Why not? Why not? So, Stealing Dawn. This will be a fun topic. This almost could have been 2 slides. It's going to talk about original Ice the Sword. What's the matter, girl? Oh, you want to be back here. Okay. So remember I just said the Kingsguard symbolize the others pretty well. It's a strong parallel. And at the Tower of Joy, the most famous Kingsguard is obviously Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning. Now, we talked about dawn earlier and how all of its symbolism is similar to Lightbringer. It brings the dawn. It's, named after a sunrise, Sword of the Morning, blah, 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 blah. However, Venus is not just the morning star, as someone in the chat pointed out. It's also the even star, because Venus is not a star but a planet, and it's closer to the sun than Earth. And so sometimes it appears on one side of the sun, relative to Earth, and sometimes on the other. And that dictates whether or not it appears at sunrise or sunset. And it oscillates between these two positions every 200 some odd days, with a little blank period in the middle when it's passing either in front of or behind the sun. When Venus passes in front of the sun, it's called the transit of Venus, and you've probably seen that photo of a little black dot in front of the sun, and that's little old Venus passing in front as it switches from morning star to even star, or one or the other, I forget. And so George, knowing this mythology very well, gives us the even star symbolism in House Dayne too. There is Vorian Dayne. Can somebody look up the meaning of the name Vorian, please? Vorian Dayne was a Sword of the Morning, but he called himself the Sword of the Evening. And he was sent to the wall, by the way. So like a dark Dane sent to the wall by Nymeria is interesting foreshadowing. So that's either the last hero or Azor Ahai going to become Night's King or something like that, right? So the Danes are very important for archetypal sake. So Arthur Dayne, deceptively, despite the morning symbolism, is of course a member of the Kingsguard who symbolize the others. And Arthur Dayne turns out to be the quintessential other Kingsguard, because the Kingsguard live in a place called the White Sword Tower, and they themselves are called the White Swords. The others have white swords. They're made of ice, and they glow in the moonlight, so they look white and crystalline. And Dawn is a white sword. So when Arthur Dayne, and also Arthur, the Sword of the Morning is both a person and a sword, right? Arthur Dayne is called the Sword of the Morning. So just as the Kingsguard are called the White Swords, Arthur Dayne, named after his white sword, the Sword of the Morning. Then he joins the Kingsguard and lives in the White Sword Tower. So it's like Arthur Dayne is a white sword himself twice over, and he lives in a white sword. So it's just, the bottom line is that the sword Dawn seems to be associated with the White Walkers, despite its name. And obviously George loves the contradictions, a dragon sword called Ice, black fire, the cold that burns. Okay, George loves that stuff. It's a song of ice and fire. And he talks about how love and hate can mate. So just keep that all in mind. So the sword not finding anything for Vorian? Really? Vorian Atreides from Dune, the first person to hold the name Atreides and the true forerunner of House Atreides, creating its symbol of the hawk. That's interesting. That probably is a Dune reference then. I'll have to ask Quinn about Bashar Vorian Atreides. That's cool. That's a cool find. Did he live in a yellow submarine? Tim, was he the Yellow Emperor? So Dawn is an other's shin bone. It's not, but it looks like one. When the other melts, its bones look like milk glass, pale and hard and shiny. And of course, Dawn is very famously described over and over as pale as milk glass, alive with light. So alive with light sounds like it's either glowing or it's a little bit opalescent or translucent and shimmery. It's one of those things. And Bran talks about going to sleep with, dreaming of swords alive with starfire, which implies that Dawn could catch on fire. Vorona is Russian for crow, not Vorian. Well, that's interesting, because crows are black, and Vorian Dayne's the Sword of the Evening, and he joins the Night's Watch. So that actually makes a lot of sense. Vorona, Russian for crow. So the others' shin bones. Remember I said Kingsguard and White Walkers are parallel. And then when the White Walker melts, the bones look like milk glass. The Sword of the Morning, the White Sword, looks like milk glass. and is wielded by somebody who joins the white swords that are like the Kingsguard. So it's a wonderful circular parallelism thing. Also, the sword that the others hold is alive with moonlight. It's a pale, and it's described as a pale sword. Sam calls it the pale sword. So even though it doesn't look exactly like Dawn, it's ice crystal. Dawn looks like milk glass. It's a little different. I did once meet somebody who wanted to say that Dawn is the same thing as the sword that the other carries. But it's a shard of crystal that almost disappears when glanced edge on. That's not quite the same as Dawn, a great sword made of milk glass. In Bolton North equals in Soviet Russia. Yeah, that's true. When the Boltons take over, that's basically, there might even be parallels there, now that I think about it. That's interesting. I'll need to get a historian on the case. Maybe I'll talk to Anu. Okay, so the others parallel the walkers. Dawn looks like an other shinbone, and the others' ice swords are pale swords alive with moonlight, and Dawn is a pale sword alive with light. So, very tight symbolism. Then we get this dude, Darkstar. Hermitage is also a place part of, or actually known as the Winter Palace. Oh, that's interesting. High Hermitage is like a high winter palace. So that sounds like the Eyrie, like a place up in the mountains. That's interesting. And the Eyrie, of course, is all Ice Temple symbolism. Nice job. Frank Herbert surely took Vorian from the word Dorian, because the Atreides are very Greek. They actually are Greek. And Dorian is a type of column. It probably has other meanings in Greek too. Ah, very good. Did I lapse into egg voice accidentally? I got all squeaky. So, where was I? Darkstar. So the name Darkstar, the suns are stars. So Darkstar, his name is also Dark Sun. And that's what the long night is, the darkening of the sun. And there's even a scene in the Ariane chapter where we meet Darkstar, where he dramatically stands outlined against the setting sun. So he's eclipsing and darkening the sun himself while he's sharpening his sword, I believe, or he's sharpening his sword a second later. But yeah, Darkstar represents a dark star, and then literally George has him stand in front of the sun. His hair, yes, it looks like Dragonlord hair, but it's described as looking like a silver glacier. And glaciers are made of ice, and the wall looks like the front edge of a glacier that just had the back half cut off, basically. That's what the wall looks like. Jon sees a glacier in the Frostfangs and thinks it's the wall for a second, in fact. So Darkstar, with hair like a silver glacier and a streak of midnight black in the middle, he's just dripping long night symbolism and ice symbolism. And yet he looks like a dragon lord, and he's going to steal Dawn. The reasons why he's going to steal Dawn, I think I can explain this very quickly. But basically, before the 5-year gap was scrapped, George was planning on going from a Storm of Swords and then skipping 5 years to the next book. And Edric Storm, Ned Dane, Edric Dane, who Arya meets in book 3 and is like 13, he heads back to Starfall at the end of book 3. And 5 years later, he would have been 18. And he would have been old enough to be named the Sword of the Morning. And if Dawn is a magic sword, and Dawn needs to come out to play, to fight the others, which is strong possibility, we need to get Dawn out of Starfall somehow. Now, Ned Dane is not a big enough character to probably lead the fight against the others, so one suspects George's original plan was to have Ned Dane bring the sword out of Starfall, but to undergo some tragedy and for the sword to work its way into Jon's hands. But once he's scrapped the 5-year gap, Ned Dane is now stuck at age 13. He is too young to be named Sword of the Morning. So that plan is out. So now, and this is my hypothesis. So George now creates a new Dane that we've never heard of at all, named Darkstar. And he's the opposite sort of character of Ned Dane, who is a virtuous, good kid. Darkstar's fiendish and dastardly, playing double games and maybe slashing little girls with swords. There's controversy there, but maybe he did that. So Darkstar is invented for book 4, dramatically. Now, if Ned Dane's only purpose was to get Dawn out of Starfall, then you could see how Darkstar could serve the same role, even though he's a different character. He's not going to be named Sword of the Morning due to insufficient moral standards, but he might stop by Starfall and steal that thing. He obviously covets it. We heard him talking about it. He definitely covets it and thinks that the sword is the only thing that made Arthur Dane great. Ergo, if he can have that sword, he'll be as great as Arthur Dayne, and probably better, because he's the most dangerous man in Dorne, and he's a great swordsman. So I've made a whole video about this, but basically that's the story. Darkstar definitely going to steal Dawn. And this is an important concept, because Darkstar is a Night's King figure, named after a darkened sun. So of course he's going to steal Dawn, because if you steal Dawn, that means you're not allowing the sun to come up. Stealing Dawn is causing the long night. So of course a man named Darkstar is going to steal Dawn. And if we translate this to the original Night's King, we should think about somehow Dawn being stolen. And there's also the last hero's sword that's called Dragon Steel. George, lover of word puns, was the last hero's sword Dawn? Some people think it is. Was Dawn stolen? Somehow. Who stole it from whom? We'll get to that. But it definitely seems like George is doing something with wordplay here. Dawn is something that is stolen, and Dragon Steel implies a theft. And we see stuff like that happen. So, for example, at the Tower of Joy is Arthur Dayne, and he has Dawn. And he is guarding the Night's Queen and their baby. Not Arthur Dayne's baby, but symbolically, this is a Night's King figure or leader of the others figure with a Night's Queen and her baby in a tower. And a last hero's coming to kill him. And he has Dawn. What does Ned do? He kills Arthur Dayne. And he takes his sword. And then he brings it back to Starfall. So is Dawn the sword of the Night King? And did the last hero take Dawn from the Night King when he defeated him and bring it back to Starfall and leave it at Starfall? And the reason why he would do that is because Night's King is Azor Ahai. And Azor Ahai, it comes from the Great Empire of the Dawn, and he himself essentially stole the last Dawn sword from the Great Empire of the Dawn and became Night's King. And so that's how Night's King has a sword from the Great Empire of the Dawn that is the white sword Dawn. Final piece of the puzzle is ice. Love this stuff. Hope you guys are having fun. The Starks have a tradition of naming their family swords Ice. Their current sword is a black Valyrian steel sword. It's 400 years old from Valyria. It's called Ice, but the name is much older, Catelyn says. The name goes back to the Age of Heroes. So what the Starks do is they name their swords Ice. Every time they get a new house sword, they call it Ice. They keep renaming it. And so, why do the Starks name their swords Ice? Well, if the last hero was a Stark, guys, and if he used Dawn to defeat Night's King, then that's where the tradition come from. Because Ice is a big white sword, or Dawn is a big white sword. You could imagine that it looks like it's made of magical ice. It's the coldest thing around because it was colder than the ice demons. All right? So the last hero uses Dawn, maybe just at one time. Then he brings the sword back to Starfall, where the ancestors of the Great Empire of the Dawn, the Danes, are. It's their sword. That's why Ned returns it to Starfall in an echo of the last hero returning Dawn to Starfall after stealing it from Night's King and beating him with it. So I strongly suspect that Ned killed Arthur Dayne with Dawn. That's what they did on the show, in fact, and I suspect it'll be the same in the books. Last hero Ned will steal Dawn from Arthur Dayne, this is what we'll find out, and kill him with it, just as last hero killed Night's King with Dawn. And then afterwards, the Starks honored that sword by naming their swords Ice, because Dawn looks like it's made of ice. And it was wielded by the Night's King, who is an ice sorcerer. So, the longer version of that is Dawn is the original Ice Part 1 and 2. So the other thing about Dawn and wordplay, not only stealing Dawn is the same as stealing the sunrise, the break of dawn is an expression for when the sun rises. Dawn breaks when the sun rises. Dawn being the rosy sky right before the sun, and when the sun rises, dawn breaks open. So, the last hero, his sword broke, right? Sword broke. And then he got dragon steel. So we don't know what dragon steel is, but the fact that we've got a broken sword in the hands of the last hero who helped end the long night kind of makes you think of this whole idea of breaking dawn. So did dawn break and was it reforged? Is dawn, you know what I mean? Was it the last hero's sword? Was it broken and reforged? Or is it just that, like, we broke the power of the Long Night with Dawn, and so Dawn is a breaking sword? And Brandon the Breaker Stark, again, might be a name that applies to the last hero as well. So you've got, again, that breaker. What did he break? Maybe the Long Night. Broke the power of the Long Night. Dawn maybe was the sword of the Night's King, so maybe breaking it was how he defeated Night's King. And maybe that's after the last hero possessed it. This could be very like Lord of the Rings, where, Sauron was killed by a broken sword. That's how they sliced the one ring from his finger. So maybe the broken sword is part of all this. Only this time it's Night King with the sword that gets broken and then used against him. Any of these things could make sense. What I want to try to bring your attention to is that the wordplay of Dawn and Arthur Dayne and Dark Star, all of this stuff implies that some of these swords are switching hands, being broken, being reforged, and that there are potentially multiple swords, because we've got Dragonsteel, Lightbringer, and Dawn. They could all be the same, but, there could be a black and a white sword going on, as I've suggested many times. That's my personal theory. So I think that's enough for Breaking Dawn. We're not done talking about these swords, but this is some of the messaging of House Dayne, if you will. And Dark Star, again, is just my favorite. When he steals Dawn, it's just going to make it really obvious that, like, Night's King stole the Dawn and wielded the sword Dawn, and that Dawn is the original sword known as Ice in the hands of an Ice King. Like, it just makes... paint this image. Imagine a Night King Stark, or a Night King Azor Ahai, or a powerful Night King wizard, and he's holding Dawn, an unbreakable white sword, and that's your opponent. So, and I actually made that one slide for Night's King Azor Ahai. Oh, it's coming up. It's right here. Oh, I'm not going to do the slide right now, but this is the image. On the right, that's Dawn, alive with blue fire. But we'll get to that. Going out of order. Jon Dayne. No. Yes. Kinda. So, let me explain. Jon is not Ashara's and Brandon's son. He is Rhaegar and Lyanna's son. I'm not going to go into it, but it is settled law, okay? And if you're an r+L+J heretic, I also love you purely for your apostasy and your stubbornness, and I'm not even mad about it. But Jon is not a Dayne, and I can tell you, not Ashara's son in any case. And I have looked into this. I wanted this to be true at one point. I would love it. If George had chosen to go this way, it would have been cool. But r+L+J is true. And so the thing is, Jon and Dany both have Dayne blood. A decent amount of it, too. Because Egg married Betha Blackwood, right? But his mom was Diana Dayne. So Egg is half Dayne, and then, so his Targaryen is half Dayne. Then he marries Black Betha Blackwood. And then their children do incest for 2 generations, leading to Rhaegar and Dany. So Rhaegar and Dany are half Blackwood and half Targaryen. Again, rough genetics, doesn't work like this. The genes are random, and they're all, there's many genes that you choose from. But if you're just doing quarters and stuff, Rhaegar and Dany are half Blackwood from Black Betha, and they are half Targaryen from Egg, and Egg's Targaryen is half Dayne. So Dany is a little more Dayne than Jon, because of course Rhaegar then marries Lyanna, and Jon is half Stark and half Targaryen, with his Targaryen being somewhat Dayned, if you will. Mira and Jojen might be Daynes. Yes, thank you, Grey Waste Tim. Let me just come back to that in a second, because I do think Ashara Dayne and Howland Reed were a thing, and I do think that Diana Reed, Howland's wife, is actually Ashara Dayne, who renamed herself after her ancestor, Diana Dayne. So Diana Dayne, Diana Reed. Diana Reed is really Diana Dayne, I think. At least I like the theory. I like it. I'm not sold, but I like it and think it would make sense. But let's set aside the Reeds. They're less important to this train of thought here. So Jon has a little bit of Dayne blood, and so does Dany. So if you think about Darkstar stealing Dawn, one of the reasons why it makes so much sense is because he is like a poor imitation of Arthur Dayne in so many ways. Arthur Dayne was Rhaegar's best friend, and obviously the three Kingsguard that did what Rhaegar said were at the Tower of Joy. That was Arthur Dayne was there. So Arthur Dayne, Rhaegar's best friend. That's what was said. If anyone can truly be said to have been Rhaegar's friend. So here we have Fagon, who is probably a Blackfire, but is pretending to be Rhaegar's son. So he's fake Rhaegar's son. And here comes Darkstar, a cheap Arthur Dayne knockoff. He has stolen Dawn. He has fled Dorne. Fagon has taken King's Landing with Arianne in tow. Cersei is chased off to Casterly Rock. And in walks Darkstar with Dawn that he's stolen, but not said that he's stolen. He's like, I'm the Sword of the Morning. Hey, Rhaegar's son. Our dads were best friends. Or not, your dad and my distant uncle or whoever Arthur Dayne is, we're best friends. And here I am to swear my sword to you, just as Arthur Dayne swore this same sword to Rhaegar. And so, of course, Fagon would be all over this. That is a powerful symbol. It helps legitimize him as Rhaegar's son, be like, oh, look, the Danes are back on their side again. There's Dawn again. It just smells vintage, okay? So I really can see this happening. But then what's going to happen when Dany gets to King's Landing? There's going to be a conflict between Fagon and Dany. That's foreshadowed. Dany's going to slay the lie of the Mummer's dragon. I don't want to get too into all the various scenarios, but it's probably be tragic. Fagon will probably die. I think they're specifically foreshadowed that he'll get eaten by a dragon. He might try to ride a dragon. Or maybe if Dany's walking that edge, maybe she feeds him to the dragon as a way of slaying, like, prove that you're a Targaryen. The dragon will decide, or something edgy like that. Who knows? I think Fagon will get eaten by the dragon. Tyrion takes his dragon piece and knocks his over when they play Syvas. So now we've got Fagon defeated or potentially just fought by Dany. There's some conflict there. I don't know who wins, but what happened to Arthur? What happened to fake Arthur Dayne with Dawn? I think Dany will get it. I think he'll die, because obviously Darkstar, if he has Dawn, his only purpose is to die and cough up the sword so better men can wield it. And the thing is, Dany has promised to give a sword to Jorah, a magic sword to Jorah, back in book 1. I don't know if George is still going to do that, but it would make sense if there's a little shuffle, if Jon gives Longclaw back to House Mormont, which he would love to do, if Jorah redeems himself and comes back to Westeros and honors his father's wish, which was to join the Watch. I do think this will happen, somewhat like on the show. I think they got this right, that Jorah will be on the Watch. I think Jon will give him back Longclaw, and Dany will give Jon Dawn. And he will essentially be the Sword of the Morning by virtue of being the obvious person who's going to lead the Watch against the others. So if anyone should have Dawn, it should be Jon. Now, Jon constantly thinks about his father's sword, which is ice. Even after he has Longclaw, he spaces out and thinks about ice and how he used to dream that Ned would give him ice and declare him a true son and all this stuff. His father's sword, ice, that's what he wants. The thing is, the original ice is Dawn. So really, it could be a way of saying that the sword he's going to get is the original Stark ice. Now, Jon is hung in the south. I'm sorry, the Sword of the Morning is hung in the south. In the sky. There's a line in the story. Sorry, I'll stop. There's a line. Jon looks just before the sunrise, and he says the last constellations were in the south, and he saw the Sword of the Morning still hanging in the south. That's the joke. So the Sword of the Morning, almost certainly the constellation Orion. Orion, sure enough, is in the south. And in many cultures, he's not holding a bow, but rather a club over his head or a sword over his head. And even when he's got the bow, he's got a sword hanging from his belt, his sword belt. It's a little nebula. So there's a bunch of sword symbolism with Orion, and that is definitely the Sword of the Morning constellation. There's even more to it than that, but it's in the right place. It's in the south. So Jon's looking at the Sword of the Morning constellation, and it's like, oh, it's the last one in the sky just before the sunrise. And then he's like thinking about getting a little bit of hope, So it's kind of a touchy-feely thematic symbolism scene, but I do think that Jon will be the Sword of the Morning, and he'll be the last one, fighting there in the night before the dawn. The last thing, and this is a little stronger and more clear, Jon, there's 4 times in the book when Martin writes somebody holding a sword and it runs with morning light. Jon Snow is hung, not hanged. They stabbed him instead. Yeah. No, he's hung in the South, where it counts. So 4 times in the story, someone holds aloft a sword, and it says that it ran with morning light or shone with morning light. 2 of those times, it was Jon. And both of those, it's in the scene where he executes Janos Slynt. Thank you. Oh, he's going on Biggest Loser for sure. Janos Slynt. What a friggin' loser. God, that guy. So if you remember, Ed, fetch a block. That line is from Jon. He was about to hang Janos Slynt and then decides to execute him instead in the way of the Starks. And funny story, George Martin said it was one of his beta readers that caught that and said, no, Jon should execute him like a Stark. He had written it to be hung. And George rewrote the scene, but he kept the idea of like, oh, let's hang him. No, let's chop his head off. And only it's Jon now being indecisive instead of George. A little behind the scenes for you. I always think that's cool. But yes, he holds Longclaw up and it runs with morning light. So when Jon is acting like a Stark, he wields a sword of morning light. It happens twice. The third time is when Robb Stark is sitting enthroned as the king in the north at River Run. He's just been declared king of the north. And one of the Freys, it's Cleo's Frey, is dragged before him. He is the spitting image of the king of winter. He's sitting on the throne. The sword is across his lap, exactly like the kings of winter. And his wolf, Grey Wind, is at his side. And he is intimidating and he is interrogating Cleos. And one of the things he says is he demands the return of ice. And when he says that, the morning light runs across his sword. So it's like, the Stark sword, the one they should have, ice, is the one that runs with morning light. And the fourth time it happens is when Joffrey is given Widow's Wail, which used to be ice. He's handed the sword and he holds it up and it runs with morning light. And then he cuts a book with it because he's an asshole. But nevertheless, the Stark, that's ice. It's one half of ice. It's been dyed red, so it looks like Lightbringer now. And then it runs with morning light. So you run those ideas together and it's like, Lightbringer was Dawn, which was the original ice, which was wielded by a Stark. And that makes perfect sense with the story. This is not the aliens build Storm's End that I'm concluding. I am concluding that the last hero was a Stark, that his sword was Dawn and Lightbringer, right? And it all makes sense. This is what we kind of expect. So the key thing about Azor Ahai being Night's King, which we're about to get to, is that Azor Ahai is like a Dane. He's Great Empire of the Dawn, just like the Danes are. So if the last hero is connected to him, then he is part Dane too. So there's a Dane and a Stark aspect. I guess I should mention Eldrick Shadow Chaser. One of the 5 names for Azor Ahai is Eldrick Shadow Chaser. It comes from Elric of Melniboné, obviously, who has his own black and red flame sword. But the name Eldrick Shadow Chaser is one of the names for Azor Ahai, and we only find variants of that name Eldrick in House Stark and House Dane. So Eldrick Shadow Chaser, probably the name for the last hero or Azor Ahai in Westeros. And that's why we have Edric Dane and Ulrich Dane and Elric Stark and Edric Snowbeard Stark. There's a bunch of them. And not only that, Edric Dane is considered to be named after Eddard Stark. So even Eddard is a name variant of Eldrick Shadow Chaser. So it just tells you Stark and Dane have the same connection to Lightbringer, which is through the last hero, and Dawn, which is also the original ice. So yeah, this is the iceberg. Now we're deep into the iceberg, guys. This is what it's about. Now you guys feel hung in the South, right? Is everybody hung in the South? For those of you who've seen the movie Major League, you know what that motion was. All right, next slide. Oh God, is it really Ice Spiders time? No, let's do Azor Ahai Night's King before this. I'm mad. I'm mad. I put these out of order. We'll do ice spiders afterwards. Okay, so I've been saying it, but Azor Ahai became Night's King. And I do want to stress that Azor Ahai may not be one person, but more like an archetype. A flaming sword warrior from the great empire of the dawn. There might be more than one. There's many clues that there were more than one. Dany sees multiple gemstone emperors holding swords of pale fire in her vision, which is that's a big clue that Dawn, a pale sword that might light on fire, comes from the great empire of the dawn, and that there were multiple swords, or that they passed the sword down from king to king. One of those things. Where to begin? Azor Ahai, Night's King. Remember we talked about the Night's King archetype figures? Stannis acts like Night's King, and Rhaegar acts like Night's King, and Jon acts like Night's King, and I mentioned Aegon too. Well, those are all Azor Ahai people too. 3 of them are dragon lords, Jon, Rhaegar, and Aegon, meaning Targaryens. And Stannis is an Azor Ahai person by way of declaring himself Azor Ahai reborn and carrying around a flaming sword. So the people that most strongly give us Night's King archetypes also give us Azor Ahai archetypes. And the next person that does that is someone I haven't mentioned yet, and that would be Euron. So Euron, okay. Euron, like I said, he parallels Varamyr with his one blue eye. He wears a cloak of midnight black. It's a sable cloak that he stole from Baelor Blacktide. Varamyr Royce also wears a black sable cloak and then gets reanimated by the others and has that one eye Odin symbolism, right? So Euron, sable black cloak. His hair is like a midnight sea. The sail of his boat is pitch black. So he's got tons of midnight darkness symbolism. Then in Aeron's vision, he literally is declaring himself a god. And he says, the red comet heralded the beginning of the end. I am the new god rising from the graves and charnel pits. So he's basically saying, during this new long night that's coming on, I am going to become a god king. So that sounds like an evil Azor Ahai, or like the Bloodstone Emperor who was said to rule during the long night. But like I said, Euron also has Azor Ahai symbolism because he's trying to be a dragon lord. He's saying the red comet heralds his kingship, and we know the red comet is a sign of Azor Ahai reborn. He wants to steal a dragon. He has Valyrian armor and a Valyrian dragon horn. He's been to Asshai, which is where Azor Ahai comes from, and then he sails to Westeros from Asshai and comes across like a foreigner with foreign magic. So he's replaying Azor Ahai coming to Westeros from Asshai, which is the great empire of the dawn, with a bunch of dragon shit and ensorceling people in Westeros and becoming this sort of god king during the new apocalypse. So that is the dark Azor Ahai story, but he's again implied as a Night's King as well. Just like all the other Azor Ahai people are also Night's King people. So if you stare at this for long enough, you're like, friggin' A, Azor Ahai and Night's King must be either the same person or two sides of the same coin, brothers maybe, father and son. I don't like to get too specific because it's just, you can only, it's speculation after a certain point. But the symbolism suggests they're the same people. This art is by Tim Durning. So the next thing, the whole idea of a king of night, like the night, one of the thing about Night's King, like I said, he was said to be only a man by the light of day, but the night was his to rule. Like, well, that was the long night. Bloodstone Emperor similarly is a king of the long night. Euron is set up to be a king during the long night. So that's kind of like the archetype, you might say. And even the Azor Ahai story, he kills Nissa Nissa and then the moon cracks and then he holds up Lightbringer. But the moon cracking is the thing, according to me, that caused the long night. So Azor Ahai is also a figure who causes the long night and then becomes a powerful sorcerer during the darkness, which makes him a king of night figure as well. So it's just the archetype. Azor Ahai is a king of night figure. He is the Night King. Dragonsteel, I already covered that. I got ahead of myself. I completely busted that one. Also catching the moon. Remember, Night's King chased Night's Queen, whose skin was as pale as the moon and cold as ice. So she is an icy moon queen figure, and Night's King catches her And then when Bran goes to the Nightfort and has his chapter at the Nightfort, he sees a twisted weirwood. And what does it look like it's doing? It's trying to catch the moon and drag it down into the well. So it's a parallel of Night's King catching the moon-like Night's Queen. Only it's a weirwood catching the moon. So that implies that Night's King is a weirwood sorcerer, and that him and Night's Queen's whole thing has to do with weirwood. And of course it does, because the friggin' Nightfort is built around that weird-ass weirwood, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the weirwoods are eternal, so of course that was there first. All the castles are built around weirwoods. So whatever Night's King and Queen did at the Nightfort, we should assume it had something to do with that weirwood organism. And so we see the echo with the weirwood itself dragging down the moon. Now, Azor Ahai also drags down the moon because, again, when he killed Nissa Nissa, it left a crack across the face of the moon. So another parallel. Night's King, Azor Ahai, they both catch the moon and own it, okay? And that's how the Long Night gets stolen. I had a question earlier. Let's see. Somebody sent me a PayPal and said, if Jon's body is stolen by the others before being resurrected by fire magic, wouldn't that invert the Azor Ahai Night's King archetype? Yes, it would. Hey, that's a good observation. And George does love to do that stuff. That's pretty cool. I didn't think about that. It would be an inversion. Stannis is an Azor Ahai figure who goes to the wall and takes ownership of the Nightfort and then invades Westeros. So that's another pattern of it. Azor Ahai goes north, takes over the Watch, and then invades Westeros because he's declaring himself a king. So catching the moon, that's the last Azor Ahai topic. All right. Now let's friggin' do it. You bastards. You bastards. Ice spiders. It's the best video I've ever made. And if you haven't watched it, good news. The best video I've ever made is right there waiting for you. Like an ice spider with a clutch of babies waiting to eat on you. Okay, I'll stop. But, all right. So the Ice Spiders video, it is one of my best videos. Please hit the Ice Spider emojis. I make a joke out of it because it did not do very well when I put it out. And I was very crushed. I was just like, oh man, I put so much into this. It has since come up somewhat. It is still way too low on my list of videos. It is one of my very best friggin' videos, guys. It's got jokes. It's got George's best symbolism. It's got old Nan, like all the best old Nan stuff. It's got the best evidence for others and weirwood connections. So there's a few things we got to talk about, but go watch it. It's the best video. And yes, they are real. They are metaphors. There's no doubt the ice spiders are metaphors, but I do have to think they are real. And really, it's probably the same answer as whether or not ice dragons are real. George has said that the others can do things with ice that we can't imagine. They can make things out of it. So the ice spider, presumably, if it's something that the others actually ride, is just what it sounds like. It's instead of an other is a human made out of ice. An ice spider would be a spider made out of ice. And that's how most people draw them. This one is by Russell Dongjun Liu. And I used this for the cover of my Ice Spiders video, which Karsnark has conveniently dropped in the chat. I had so much fun making it. I really did. That's why I think it's my best video, because I think I loved making it the most. Okay, so I just will point out the broken eggshells on the ice spider's back and the babies below and the mandibles and the multiple eyes. This is a masterwork of George's imagination and George's imagination and this artist's interpretation of it. Ice spiders are so cool. They are definitely getting more than one slide. That's just the intro. But what I was saying is that if ice spiders really exist, then ice dragons probably really exist too. And in the story, The Ice Dragon, as we discussed yesterday, the ice dragon is real. And Old Nan tells stories about the ice dragon. And George's little short story, The Ice Dragon, sounds like one of Old Nan's stories. So no one should be surprised if there is a real ice dragon in the heart of winter that is just... And remember, in the world of ice and fire, the maesters say, oh, in the shivering sea, the sailors say, there's ice dragons who are big creatures with translucent wings through which you can see the stars And, actually, I have artwork of this. So first of all, this is one of the ice dragons from the short story, Adara. And what I'm trying to say is that the ice dragon in the story, the ice dragon, matches the description that the maesters give of the ice dragons of the Shivering Sea exactly. Translucent wings, made of ice crystal, they have glowing blue eyes, and they melt when slain. That is exactly the same as in the book. And this art is by Luis Royo. I showed this one yesterday. This is Mark Simonetti's drawing of the ice dragon and Adara. Same idea. So it fits the description perfectly. Oh, it's Shivering Sea. That's what it is. It's not called Ice Dragon. It's called Shivering Sea. Hell yeah. Jimmy P. Duda. He also did a different ice spider one that I will show you. So behold, this is Jimmy P. Duda's ice dragon. Creatures of the Shivering Sea. They're supposed to be 3 times larger than regular dragons, which is also the same as the story of the ice dragon. And they breathe cold. And that also is the same. By the way, this is part of the Unseen Westeros exhibit. Let me look up his other... Jimmy P. Duda's frickin'... Look at this, dude. Oh, he did another ice dragon and an ice spider. Oh, man. So this is another interpretation of the ice spider. It's more or less the same, but you see the chain going to the other. So the other is like got the ice spider on a chain, just like it was a hound. And you see all the other eyes in the distance. So this is pretty gnarly as well. So this is also Jimmy P. Duda. And this is his ice dragon. When you can see it's got a nice Night King on the back. So this is perhaps influenced by the show. But yeah, I do think there's a good chance we could see an ice dragon in the story. We might see something more like the show, where one of Dany's dragons is whited, or we might see an actual ice dragon come out of the north during the long night. And let me explain the metaphor of the ice spider, because that's what's cool. As you can see on the screen, ice spiders are what frozen trees look like. And frozen trees are pretty important in the terms of symbolism. I will confess, first of all, this is my idea. No one else gave me this. This is my idea. And I will confess that I got it by watching the show. And when I saw Bran walk up to the frozen weirwood tree, this is, in the show, this is the same weirwood that Night King was created against. Back when this landscape was not frozen, you can see the same black stones around the tree. Night King was created there. And here, thousands of years later, it is now a frozen landscape. And Bran is here in the weirwood net, and he walks up to this frozen tree. And as you can see, when a tree is frozen, its limbs are weighed down with ice, and they arch to the ground. And they look like a goddamn spider. I mean, look at these two. On the bottom is Bran's Night King tree, and on the top is just a photo that I found of a frozen tree. And they both look like spiders. The icicles look like little hairs on the legs. It's very creepy and ominous once you see it. So the ice spiders, guys, they have frozen limbs, right? Like trees. Now, if the others ride down on the winds of winter and they ride ice spiders, first of all, ice spiders do ride the wind. Spiders ride the wind, rather. Spiders can fly, and they do it by riding the wind. So when we talk about the ice spiders climbing up the wall, which might be a thing, remember Jon's dream with the Azor Ahai sword, it says his foemen scuttled up the ice like spiders. So it creates this idea, the ice spiders, that's how the others are just going to ride up the wall on the spiders. Now that is terrifying. If you're a Night's Watchman and you're 700 feet up on the wall and you see the army of the dead, you're like, yeah, they can't get up here. And then the ice spiders come forward and start climbing the wall. But spiders also fly. That is what I'm saying. They also fly. So it might even be worse than them climbing the wall. I don't think so. I think that they will climb the wall if they are real. But the symbolism is more important. And of course, if they're frozen trees and the others are riding frozen trees, well, what does that mean? The others are like frozen greenseers. Just as we saw suggested in Bran's dream, where he saw the bodies of other dreamers impaled on the ice spires. Oops. The ice spires. Very close to ice spiders. So, If the others are riding frozen trees, that just means they're frozen Greenseers. The frozen trees are the weirwoods. There's a lot of evidence, and we can't get into this today, but that the weirwood net has been bifurcated. It was invaded and sundered, and just as the wall divides Westeros, there seems to be two halves of the weirwood. And so, in theory, when Bran goes wandering on the weirwood net over and sees the others, like that should be possible. There is a side of the weirwood net where there's an other intelligence. I don't know if you want to call it the Great Other, or the spirit of Night's King or Night's Queen. Who knows? But there is a frozen half of the weirwood net. And the others do still have a tie to the weirwood trees. And that is what the ice spiders are telling us. When the long night falls, the others will ride down on the wind. They will fly using frozen trees. Those are the ice spiders that they will be using. So the whole thing about spiders flying is just Greenseer talk, because we know the Greenseers, when they use the weirwoods, they are flying, right? Bran's flying in his dream. Bloodraven says, you will fly. That's not just skin-changing birds. That's like the astral projection flying. So the others can do that too. So if the others are still tied to the weirwoods, and they will use them to invade Westeros in some sense, at some point, the wordplay, I spy doors, occurred to somebody. I don't remember who that was. That might have been a Ravenous Reader special. I don't think that was mine. I do forget after a while. I spy doors. I put it right on the screen so you can see. If the ice spiders are a reference to frozen weirwoods, well, those frozen weirwoods are I spy doors. And we know the weirwoods are symbolized as doors. Bloodraven literally says, through those doors, you and I can see the past. He says gates or doors, I forget. But of course, the Black Gate is a weirwood door. The Moon Door is a weirwood door. House of Black and White has a weirwood door. The weirwoods are a portal to the astral realm. That's why they are a door. They are the door between life and death as well. And the Black Gate door is between the realms of the living and the realms of the dead, the green lands and the frozen lands. So the weirwoods, they're in between. They are the doorway and the portal between all kinds of stuff. But they are I spy doors. That means the others can watch out of the weirwoods. And now we understand why Lord Commander Mormont says, tell them that the dead are walking and the trees have eyes again. Those two things go together because the others can watch out of the weirwoods just like the Greenseers, because the others used to be green men or Greenseers or something. I will expand on that in a minute, but actually, no, I'll tell you right now. They are basically green man spirits that were ripped out of the weirwood net. That's the birthing. Night's King and Queen are birthing white shadows. Part of that is ripping spirits out of the weirwood net. Yeah, I Spy Doors is a total dad joke. Confirmed canon. It totally is. Yeah, William Blake's Doors of Perception is where the band The Doors got. And of course, that's all hippie stuff that George is into. So there's a couple scenes that back this up, which I went into in the Ice Spiders video. For example, the first time we see the moon door opened, it is opened for Tyrion's potential execution by Lysa, who is a Night's Queen figure in an ice castle. She opens the weirwood door, and the first line that comes after, the cold, uncaring stars like glared back or gazed back under the glare of cold, uncaring stars. So it's like stars, cold stars, watching through the door of death that is a weirwood door. And when it's opened, then the portal is open and you can throw people out of the weirwood door and they fall to an icy death, which, as we saw in Bran's dream, symbolizes some sort of transformation that dreamers can undergo to become others. You see how this works. So we open the moon door and the cold stars are washing back. And there's a couple other scenes that are similar to that, but that'll just give you a taste. Go watch the Ice Spiders video. But it's all but certain that the others can at least watch through the weirwoods. I think they can do more than that. I think under the right conditions, they will able to use the weirwoods to teleport, because the others do not have permanent physical bodies. They can turn into mist. It is strongly implied, as I discussed earlier. Tormund describes them as a mist and shadows with teeth. They don't break the snow, which means they don't really have weight. So you can break them with dragon glass, but they don't press down on the snow when they walk. So it's a partially insubstantial existence that they lead. And if they're riding down on the ice spiders, like, what does that mean? Raiden wins. I mentioned that because, of course, Raiden from Mortal Kombat, he has my favorite teleportation move. He sort of disappears on one side and then appears on the other. Zero, zero, like that. And I always think of that sound. So I think that there is a way that during the long night, once the wall is down, the others may be able to just start appearing in God's Woods, or maybe in weirwoods that are not in God's Woods, or maybe depending on if the God's Woods are still warded properly. Why did the first men build their castles around weirwoods, guys? The reason might be that they're guarding those weirwoods. They're not worshiping them. They're worshiping them like Craster worships the others. They are offering blood sacrifice to the weirwoods to maintain the strength of the others, perhaps. And if there's not a Stark in Winterfell, and if blood sacrifice isn't offered, and the wards are broken and weakened, they might be able to just pop right out of the weirwood and collect their due. And when we see the other appear with Gilly and Sam, it's just outside the cottage. There's a weirwood right outside the cottage, and the wights are surrounding the weirwood. So did the other just pop out of the weirwood right there? Or does it literally walk? Did it walk from the fist of the first men all the way and just follow Sam? Like, no, it didn't walk. That's the irony of calling them White Walkers. They don't actually really have to walk. They just appear when they need to. They're a mist, guys. They're shadows and mist. They're the shadows of the trees. A shadow emerged from the dark of the wood. It's right in the first chapter. A shadow emerged from the dark of the wood. They just pop out of the trees when they need to, guys. And in the Varamyr Sixskins prologue, that's what George paints a picture of. Varamyr dies and he goes through Thistle and he goes into the weirwood tree and pops out, and then he's a spirit on the wind. And it says, fingers of frost reached out across the weirwood to touch one another. And it says the weirwood was a pale shadow armored in ice. The others are pale shadows. The others wear ice armor. So George is describing this weirwood tree as a pale shadow armored in ice. Then when the army of the dead marches by, fingers of frost reach out along the face of the weirwood to touch one another. So it's like the frozen hands of the others reaching out of the weirwood, which is a pale shadow armored in ice, to become a tree warrior. That's what's happening in that scene. Like, symbolically, that's what George is trying to spell out. They're just crawling out of the weirwood. That's their womb. And that's why Night's Queen, might be like a weirwood tree, or maybe better said, a spirit inside the weirwood tree. So here's what I think. I think that when it says Night's King and Queen copulated and had and sacrificed to the others, I think that that was probably inside the weirwood net. I think Night's Queen is in the weirwood net. Night's King Azor Ahai goes in the weirwood net, and they do magic sex in there. And the white shadows pop out of the tree as if the tree is the Night's Queen's womb. I think that's it. And that is how the others are both spirits from inside the weirwood and the children of Night's Queen. That is how that all connects. And I think I just got ahead of myself. I think that's supposed to be on this slide. Well, no, I'm going to build on the idea here. But that's ice spiders. So I already did Azor Ahai, Night's King. And here we go back to the Night's Queen one more time. See, this is the point of the iceberg, is that I can give you the simple ideas first, and then we build them up. And by the time we're getting to the complicated stuff, it doesn't seem like it's coming out of nowhere. Like, oh, the ice spiders, teleportation, what the hell is he talking about? Well, you understand. We've built up so many reasons that the White Walkers seem to come from the weirwoods and seem to be green men. And then once you get deep enough, you get enough specific magical mechanics that George has given us in clues, like Melisandre birthing shadows and Varamyr's scene with the fingers of frost, and you can start to figure out how it all works. And I've been doing this for 8 years, and I've had a lot of people helping me, some of whom are in the chat, so that's yeah. I think it's magic weirwood sex. That's what I think. Pretty cool, right? So, thinking about Night's Queen again, I said she's probably a Stark. I just said she might be a damn weirwood tree or a spirit inside a weirwood tree. So this must be a woman who is connected to weirwood magic. And that makes sense because, again, I suggested that really ice and fire are elemental magics and probably come back to nature. They are kind of nature magic. And it's probably that Children of the Forest powers are what started all this, and maybe you might say mutated into fire and ice magic. Or it might be that the Children of the Forest, with their Greenseer power, can access fire and ice magic. Because remember, I said nobody has a monopoly. Like, fire magic is out there to be discovered by anybody. Relorists, Valerians, or some random dude in the Grey Waste with a campfire. You need a campfire in the Grey Waste because it's cold. It's called a frozen hell. So, by the way, if you like the tinfoil that the Starks are not first men, but came over the northern passage from the far east, like the Great Empire at the dawn, the one clue I have for you, I don't know if I've ever told you this, Grey Waste, Tim. When Catelyn is telling off Ned in the throne room, she's like, go back home to the frozen Grey Waste you Starks call home. Frozen Grey Waste. Now, the Grey Waste in the east is said to be a frozen desert. So did the Starks come from the Grey Waste, Tim? Does that make any sense to you? Is there any clues that could... The Starks are associated with pearls. Maybe they connected to the Pearl Emperor. When the Faith of the Seven has that jeweled cup and the Starks are pearls, and always the pearl direwolf this. It's a moon symbol also. And they potentially have connections to the Danes. So... let's talk about the Night's Queen characters. One of the ways we can find out about Night's Queen is by looking at all the parallel characters. And this might be a way to do good studies of archetypes. Look at all, and this is what I do. We take all the Azor Ahai people and we stack them up. What do they have in common? We did that a minute ago. So let's go through, oh snap, Mossavi video. Yeah, Mossavi Starks. Yeah, get on it, buddy. So if we look at all the Night's Queen figures, they have certain things in common. And it's basically they're implied as Starks or they have weirwood connections. Sometimes it's more cryptic, sometimes it's really obvious. Okay. Lyanna, a Stark, Blue Winter Rose Crown and abduction during the winter and all that stuff makes her a Night's Queen figure. She's also the Knight of the Laughing Tree. So that gives her a very strong weirwood connection, besides the fact that she rides horses like a centaur and worships the old gods. And Rhaegar most assuredly sought her out because she was a Stark connected to the old gods. And that was part of the prophecy or something. So Lyanna, both a Stark and weirwood associated. Then we have Val. Val is Jon's Night Queen. Val has a weirwood brooch and she's from the north. She looks beautiful and looks like could be from a royal court. And like I said, when Stannis offers to make Jon Stark Lord of Winterfell, he'd be marrying Val. So Val would become a Stark. So she's both weirwood and Stark associated. That's how this goes. And let me get some friggin' Val artwork up because Val is a total hottie and a badass. And who doesn't like Val? And Val, obviously, the name Val definitely is a play on Valkyrie. You know, we don't want to get into all that, but they are kinds of warrior women who collect the spirits of the dead. They're associated with Norse mythology in the north and Valhalla and all that stuff. The Val art is some of the best. That's why I gotta share it. We're having a good time today, aren't we? I'm feeling like we are. What was yum? Oh, Val. Yeah. Everything about it. She could take Jon to Valhalla. Ooh, Rai. There's Rai. She's the one who made my Reading Rhaegar logo, by the way. She sent me an updated one that has RH Reheating Rhaegar, but I made this video before she sent it to me. But shout out to Rai in the chat for the Reading Rhaegar logo and many laughs besides. So here is Val the Wildling and Ghost by Hazen Herds. And this is that scene where Jon says, "Are you trying to steal my wolf?" And I was pointing out that is a Night's Queen thing because that's like stealing his ghost. So this is that scene. A couple people have drawn it. Here is King Jon and Queen Val. So this is the alternate future I was talking about, where Jon becomes Jon Stark, Lord of Winterfell, and Val is his queen. So this is Chili Raven art, of course. You recognize the style probably. And this is awesome. I'm not much into shipping and all that stuff, but this is fun to imagine. It definitely is. Oh, and yeah, Chili Raven art. This one is by Eric Velhagen. It's very cool, a little bit impressionist. This is Val and Dalla. Dalla being Mance Rayder's wife, and Val being Dalla's sister. So very cool. They're trudging through the north there. The Jon and Val dialogue is also pretty hot. Like, it's not overt flirting, but it's definitely kind of flirty. Did I mention Val has a weirwood brooch? I did. There you can see the weirwood brooch. So, yeah, weirwood and Stark associated. So this is after, the joke is that Selyse has a mustache that she tries to pluck, and it keeps coming back, and she curses it or something. And so I think this is, is it Jon asking Val about the mustache? Or the other way around. I forget, but it's definitely, okay, it's very flirty. It's definitely fun. Yeah, Jon's not going to like Val so much after she helps burn Shireen. Yeah, Val does want to burn Shireen. That is true. She's like, she's dead. The child is dead. Burn her. She got aggressive. It was a little aggressive. Here's another Jon and Ghost. This is by Breakski. And this is also Chili Raven art, by the way. This is by Break Sky, actually. So more of the same Val with Ghost. This is one of my favorite. This is Sandra Winther. I Am No Princess, it is called. So I feel like the art almost makes the case that she's a Night's Queen figure even better than anything I could say. Just look at her. But there's her symbolism. She's got gray eyes in one scene and blue in another. George said that was a mistake. But blue eyes, obviously. One of the major clues is like, the Night's Watch was standing around going, frick, it's cold. And she's like, this isn't cold. When the others come, that's cold. So she's all like, you don't know what cold is. Then she comes and goes in the haunted forest, easy breezy as you pleasy, with no concern for her safety, riding a one-eyed mule. And she comes back when she wants to. So it's kind of like she's this mistress of the haunted forest who doesn't feel the cold, and it's all very symbolic. Then the honey-colored hair is important as a symbol of the fire of the gods. I'm sorry, honey is the food of the gods. It's a similar concept to the fire of the gods. And honey ties back to the idea of a beehive, which is an important symbol of the others. So when we go to the Eyrie, the sky cells are described as looking like a honeycomb. But since the Erie is covered in ice, Sansa says it looks like a frozen honeycomb. So this is perfect. We mostly talk about fire stuff here. We talk about fire dragons. Is the chat stuck again? No, it's good. We talk about fire dragons a lot, and the fire of the gods and Prometheus and all this stuff. Well, the others have their frozen version of all of that. And I maybe should have said that earlier. Nothing burns like the cold. Their eyes are like cold blue stars. Stars are hot, and blue stars are actually hotter than orange ones. So even though the others are cold, they have a cold version of all the fire and all the burny stuff. So when they say ice preserves and fire consumes, the others have a consuming fire aspect to them as well. And fire can make zombies which preserve. So goes both ways in standard George fashion, right? So the others have a burning cold magic, and they have a cold version of everything. Honey and lightning are the two of the important ones. So the food of the gods is honey, and there's a daughter of Garth that the Ellen Eversweet, the first beekeeper, and she keeps the bees and turns into a tree, or what is it? She founds House Beesbury, yeah. So that honey is a symbol of the food of the gods and the power of the gods. It's always Prometheus metaphor stuff. So a frozen honeycomb or frozen beehive, that's like the others' version of the food and fire of the gods. And the others seem to be a hive mind. And of course, bees are, they obviously have they're individual bees, but they function as a hive. Like the fantasy science fiction idea of a hive mind is based on the way that insects like bees act in unison and in coordination. The way that the queen can send out signals that all the workers obey, right? What I love best about bees is how they dance out the locations of the flowers. Like, they do a little dance and all the other bees watch, and then they know where the bush is, like 2 miles away. That's some advanced stuff, man. With their little bee brains, how do they do that? So the others, we can think about the others as like a frozen hive of bees. They move quick and sting, shout out Muhammad Ali, and they are a hive mind. And remember when I said they're like Greenseer spirits ripped out of the trees? They are the best way to maybe express this, guys. And this has to go back into Azor Ahai weirwood net stuff. And we'll come back to Val. Don't worry, you know I can do this. I can do this. When Azor Ahai invades the weirwood net, he excavates it. He scoops out the spirit. He evicts the spirits. That is the same as Night's King birthing the others through Night's Queen. It is the same action. Azor Ahai goes in the weirwood net, the others come out, and it seems like Azor Ahai comes out as Night's King as well. So what's being booted out of the weirwood net is the original hive mind of the weirwoods. That is what is being exiled. The weirwood trees are then empty. And that's why they look like zombies. They look like dead things, blood and bone with these faces. They're like, oh. And in fact, they're called white trees, but they're also W-I-G-H-T, white trees. They literally are zombie trees. They have lost their brains and their spirits. So the exiled hive mind of the weirwoods is the others, the original one. And the hive mind that's in the weirwoods now is actually an agglutination of all the human and other Greenseers who have come in since then, following in the footsteps of Azor Ahai. That's why Bloodraven is a dragon person, and we see all this crap about dragon Greenseers. Jon Snow is a skinchanger with a wolf that looks like a weirwood, but he's a dragon. And when Jon dies, his spirit goes into his werewolf, just like Azor Ahai gives up his physical life and goes into the weirwood net. It's the same idea. So the others being the original hive mind of the weirwood net is very important, because in a minute I'm going to explain how we solve the problem of the others, and we have to understand that they are the exiled original weirwood net hive mind. So that's why they are like bees. They are like a hive. And that's why Val has honey-colored hair. Symbolism, baby. Let's go the rest of this. This one is by Vilepero. V-I-L-E-P-E-R-O. So I would say Vilepero. But that's Val. Got a little bit of a pouty look, but that's probably the best weirwood brooch on her right shoulder there. Pretty dope. Couple bones. Got the big braid. And there's just two more. This one is by Morgaine Lefy. And this is Val and Mel depicting the moons of ice and fire, if you will, facing off here as they burn weirwood. So there's a lot of symbolism going on in that scene. Probably don't want to get too lost. But again, the symbolism really pops when you take George's descriptions and start drawing them. And you're like, oh God, what is this? And lastly, this one is by Matt Olson Art. Here's beautiful Val. Oh, marry me, John. I'll have your children. I don't know about that. Maybe if you bring her enough flowers, she'll give you this look. Or kill enough heads. You bring her the head of like one of Stannis's annoying knights, then maybe she'll look at you like this. Sir Patrick Mallister of King's Mountain. I think Woon Woon just smashed him against the wall, actually, so he is no more. And thus, that's enough, Val. Selyse. So Stannis, obviously I said Mel has parallels, but she is a fiery woman. And Stannis has an icy woman too. And in fact, the pattern, I kind of skipped this, but all the Night's King Azor Ahai people have two women. One is icy and one is fiery. Jon has Ygritte and Val. Rhaegar has Elia of Dorne with all her sun symbolism, and then Lyanna. Aegon has Rhaenys, and then Visenya. Stannis has Melisandre, his Red Queen, that he also sleeps with and has children with. And then he has Selyse, who's described as cold in every scene. And she also is anxious to go to the Nightfort. When Stannis is making it his seat, she's just raring to go. She's like, when can I go there? So that's kind of funny. So yeah, she's definitely cold. Even though she worships R'hllor, she's definitely got that Ice Queen symbolism. Dame de Broom. The artist is Dame de Broom, sorry, on this one. And this is obviously Lyanna in the Godswood. So it's a great, it's vibey as far as Night's Queen, Starky Night's Queen in the Godswood, you get it. So Selyse, she is not a Stark. And is she weirwood? How has she got a weirwood association? I'm trying to remember. She goes to live at the Nightfort. Pass. I forget. Oh, yes. House Florent. Thank you, Black Dread. Thank you. I knew it. I knew there was one. Okay. Sigil of House Florent. Let's take a look. A red fox circled by 12 blue flowers. They're not roses, but it's a blue flower crown. And what's in the middle? It's a red fox. And I hope I don't have to tell you that that is Azor Ahai symbolism right there. So it's the fox in the hen house. Because Azor Ahai is a thief. Red is the main color with Lightbringer and all that stuff. So the main thing is Selyse Florent, her sigil is, it's a blue flower crown. Wasn't Lyanna into blue flowers? Yeah, that's what I heard. So that's the reason. Like, this is how George uses his sigils. Like, why does House Florent have 12 blue flowers on its sigil? I don't friggin' know. He might have made up some pretend reason, but the real reason is so that Selyse, as a Night's Queen figure, is implied as a Stark and compared to Lyanna. So that's Selyse Florent. Oh, I'm so glad you helped me dig that out, Black Dread. So Visenya, I already talked about Visenya. Her connections to Starks and weirwoods are not as obvious. In fact, I don't even remember what they are. I just know that Visenya, like, not only is Visenya's Hill all Ice Moon symbolism, not only does she create both the Kingsguard and the warrior sons come out of the temple that's on her hill. And I don't know if I came back. I went on the Kingsguard tangent. This is one of the reasons why Visenya is Night's Queen. Well, I said that right. She takes Aegon's blood and then uses that as a reason to make the Kingsguard who represent the others. Later, the Ice Temple, Sept of Baelor, is built, and then the warrior's sons live there, and they look like others, which implies Night's King as the warrior, and that makes sense because he's Azor Ahai. A warrior who knew no fears is actually what Night's King description is. So the warrior's sons are the sons of the Night's King. Okay, so Sansa. Let's talk about Sansa. Sansa. Sansa is obviously a Stark. She does Nissa stuff in King's Landing. She has auburn hair, not kissed by fire, but close enough. And in King's Landing, she's doing all kinds of Nissa stuff where she's being abused by Joffrey and various things. Then Peter Baelish comes and rescues her. She flees through the Godswood, changes her clothes, climbs down the long cliff face ladder, and then she's picked up in the cold by the boat called the Merlin King, and she's taken away to the Eyrie, which is like an ice temple. And once she gets up there, it starts snowing and freezing over. And there's a very important scene where she builds the snow castle in the Godswood, and it says, it's a Godswood without gods, and they tried to plant weirwoods here, but they wouldn't grow, this and that. And she builds an ice castle that represents Winterfell. So Sansa, not only is she a Stark, but the abusive singer Marillion writes a song to try to seduce Sansa called The Roadside Rose. So, doesn't have the color blue, but Sansa is a rose, and she's a Stark rose maiden. So that's a good Lyanna parallel. She's up in this ice castle, and of course she's almost pushed out the moon door, but doesn't. Then she's, blue flowers also symbolize unrequited love, which makes sense to see the blue roses for Lyanna at the tournament where Rhaegar and Lyanna are separated, but then later we see the black roses on her deathbed. That's interesting. Okay, so what was I saying about Sansa? So she's basically doing Nissa fiery stuff in King's Landing. Then she does ice stuff in the Vale. God, where was I going with that? Oh, the Vale. Okay. So it's a Godswood without gods, and it's snowing, and she's creating an ice castle. So there's two important things that happen. One, she starts by making little snowmen, which she thinks of as, I'll make a snow knight. Remember, I said that when Sam came back from killing the White Walker, Cotter Pike was joking. And he says, are you sure you killed a White Walker and not some child's snow knight? Meaning a snowman that some kid built. But that it implies that the others are connected to the children, that they're snow knights of the children somehow. So, here's Sansa in an ice castle as Night's Queen. She's making snow knights. So she's creating White Walkers. And then she builds Winterfell right after that. So remember I said the blood of the others is in the Stark bloodline. Maybe that's the meaning of Night's Queen building Winterfell, is like Bran the Builder was her son. Or, her children became and built House Stark, essentially. Oh, Val's name, Val, is similar to Vale. And of course, there's Bridal Veil. The wall is like an icy veil. The moon has a cloudy veil. Thank you. Yeah, that's a good one, Carsonark. I didn't connect Val's name to Vale, but that's, yes. There's a bunch, it's more Lady in the Tower motif. Yes, like Val and like Lyanna, Sansa is in the Tower a bunch, in King's Landing and in the Eyrie. Both places she does it. Nice one, thank you. So, and Sansa also turns into a stone. She takes the name Elaine, and Elaine is a Night's Queen name. It's similar to Jane, Alice, Alanis, Lyanna. So Elaine is all those names are Night's Queen figures. That's an important thing about Elaine. And then Stone, that's just like a moon meteor thing. Also, there's also Bael the Bard parallels, indeed. Because it's Peter Baelish has a bard that helps him steal a Stark maiden, just as, Bael the Bard stole a Stark maiden. All those Bael names are Night King figures, by the way. Rhaegar parallels Bael the Bard. He steals Lyanna, and he's a Night King figure. That's the whole thing. I got into that. I did an episode called A Baelish Bard, and it's about how all the Bael figures, and the Sept of Baelor is on Visenya's Hill, and it's made out of white marble. So that's the ice temple of Bael, the Night King. And then that leads back to Baelor of the Evil Eye from Irish folklore as well, with Lugh, his nephew that kills him, being like the last hero. We're killing it today. Killing it. Thanks, chat. You're adding some of the stuff that I forgot. I was hoping you would. So, no, this is it's first half and second half Iceberg, Scott. We got cut off yesterday. We had a lot to go, as you can see. So that's Sansa. I don't know if I want to go any further with Sansa, but the fact that she's going to cast off her disguise and come back out of the veil and reclaim her Starkness might suggest that Night's Queen could escape and be freed from wherever she's trapped. There's a lot of symbolism that suggests that. So I am definitely hoping for a Night's Queen comeback at some point. So Arya... Alice is next. Alice Karstark I'm talking about. Alice Karstark is obviously related to the Starks by way of the Karstarks being a cadet branch of Stark. She has that really cool wedding out in the snow where she marries the new Magnar of Then, Sigurn, who's taken a sigil that's all orange and fiery. And Jon declares her Winter's Maiden as the snow lands in her hair and creates like a halo thing. So Winter's Maiden, a Stark, getting married out in the snow to a fiery dude from the north, Magnar, whose name means king. And that's a good one. We should reread that chapter soon. So that's another Night's Queen figure who's a Stark. And then we have Arya, who's a Stark. And Arya is more doing Last Hero stuff than Night's Queen stuff. But she's actually relevant because of Jane Poole. Jane Poole is dressed up as fake Arya and then married in the snow in a Godswood to Ramsay, whose symbolism is all blood and human sacrifice related, with those ice eyes that the Boltons have. So Ramsay is a bastard. He parallels Jon Snow, and he is essentially like an evil Night's King, Azor Ahai dude. And so here he is, wedding by fall. It was a nightmare, that wedding. A great chapter, but a nightmare wedding. So Jane Poole, whose sigil is a blue pool on white, or like a blue moon on white, if you will. Also, the pond is an important other sigil because their voices are like the cracking of ice on a winter lake. And that's a reference to Dante and Lucifer being trapped in a frozen lake in the ninth circle of hell. Lucifer is a dragon trapped in the ice lake, and that is another potential place where George got the idea for Azor Ahai, the dragon, becoming Night's King and becoming trapped on the icy side of the world in hell, sort of. So Azor Ahai, Night's King, is Lucifer trapped in the frozen lake of Dante's Inferno. I think that's why the others' voices are like the cracking of the ice on the winter lake. It's like Lucifer being freed from the ice lake when the others speak. That is what he is. I guarantee you he's implying that. That is way too cool to be a coincidence. So Jane Poole, her cold pool sigil alludes to the cold pond and a cold moon and all that stuff, and possibly the Winterfell pond that freezes over during her wedding. Even though that's a black pond instead of a blue one. But she's a fake Stark. She's dressed up as a Stark. So, yeah. That's Jane Poole. And then when we see her, oh God, when she's up in that bedchamber being abused horribly, she's wrapped in furs, huddled beneath the furs. She's described as corpse-like and very cold and chilled, and also like with claw marks on her and stuff. So she's absolutely a victim version of this character. That's why sometimes I say like all this about abducting the Night's Queen and stuff. Like in some versions, it's very abductive. It makes you wonder about what really happened. If Night's Queen is Nissa Nissa, it kind of makes sense. Nissa Nissa was killed and her magic was taken from her. So Night's Queen might be the flip side of that. It might be a little revenge, turning the tables aspect with Night's Queen. So that's Arya and Jane. Alanis Harlaw actually already covered. She, very similar to the Jane Poole scene, we see her in a cold chamber, huddled under furs and shivering and being corpse-like and talking about her stolen baby. Morna White Mask offers to be Jon's man, woman or man, whichever he preferred. So trans pride for Morna White Mask, and they wears a white weirwood mask. So I just threw that out. And the name Morna, sort of the morning, all that stuff. So Morna White Mask. That's honorable mention Night's Queen figure. So when you look at all those characters, it seems like Night's Queen was related to the Starks and connected to the weirwood trees. That's why I say that so confidently. Like it's spelled out a lot of ways, and it makes sense. Thanks for the flags, Tatum. So let's move on to the next point on the list. There's only a few more. So how do we create a White Walker? We've got all the pieces now, and I kind of got into this. The meme on the bottom right, I created, by the way. And the art on the left is Mark Simonetti. That's another good Ice Spiders one. You can see the frozen trees and the Ice Spiders look really similar. Look at the Ice Spiders in the background. Their legs blend right into the tree limbs. So that's another one. The visual symbolism really pops when you draw it. And then on the upper right is John Picassio's White Walkers, but I've superimposed some antlers on them. So how do we create a White Walker? Like I said, I kind of already got into this. It's implied that they're part green man spirits, and it's implied that they're the children of Night's Queen. Well, Night's Queen is some sort of weirwood sorceress. She's either outside the weirwood tree but connected to the weirwood power at the Nightfort, or she's literally a spirit inside the Nightfort weirwood. It's one or the other. And she is the mother of the others, and that's how the others are, from the weirwoods and also from her. So that eviction is the hive mind eviction. And so that's why you see them scuttling around on the Ice Spiders. Like you can really see, it's like we've been kicked out of our tree homes. The other part of this, let's talk about golems first. So the difference between Melisandre's shadow babies and the others. Melisandre's shadow babies are mostly not solid. They can become solid enough to kill. Like the shadow baby has a shadow sword and it cuts Renly. So like the others, partially solid, partially insubstantial. But we have to assume those shadows disappear. We've not heard that they hang around and cause problems or whatever. They seem to dissipate. But the White Walkers are here forever. So something's different. There's a physical component to them that gives them permanence. That, I think, is where the babies come in. So the spirits that get kicked out of the weirwoods, they're just spirits. They don't have bodies. They need golem bodies. They need icy bodies to attach the spirits to. Where does that come from? The others, like we've said, they're part human-like. They have bones and blood and all this stuff. If they're just tree spirits, then why would they have those physical bodies? Well, they collect babies, right? So somehow those babies are used to power the physical bodies that the others wear. And I don't know that they are growing the babies up into people. More likely they're killed or vampired and their mana and essence is used to create a physical body. But it's like only death can pay for life. So the unlife that the others lead, their bodies, the ice bodies must come from human sacrifice, right? I mean, you guys tell me if that makes sense to you, but that is what I deduce. And that is why they need a constant supply. I don't think they're making new White Walkers. I think they are trying to preserve their bodies or their ability to form solid bodies. It could be that if they don't have enough babies, they can't substantiate long enough or in enough numbers. There could be some limit like that, where they get more blood sacrifice and more babies, and they can materialize better and longer. Who knows? We'll find out. But yeah, that's the making of a White Walker is 1 part tree spirit and 1 part baby sacrifice to make a golem body. The symbolism of the others also suggests them as ice dragons. Like I said, they have burning blue star eyes. The meteors and comets are dragons. These are just like cold ones. So the invasion of the others is like an invasion of cold stars. The invasion of the dragons is like an invasion of hot meteors. You see how it's kind of the same. Just as dragons come from the moon, others also come from the moon, because Night's queen is as pale as the moon. So she's a moon goddess, and the others are her children. The weirwoods also are analogous to the moon, moon pale. They glow like milk, and the black gate just glows like milk and moonlight. So the weirwoods and the moon are very much parallel symbols. And the others come from a moon goddess and from the weirwoods. So just like the dragons are moon children and thus symbols for moon meteors, the others are children of a moon goddess, and they have burning star eyes as if they were falling blue meteors. So entirely parallel in terms of symbolism. They're both star children. They're both children of the moon. And if we have moons of ice and fire, then they're basically like meteors from the ice moon, which is something that might be coming. So they are the children of Azor Ahai. Remember, Azor Ahai is the one who goes into the weirwood net and donates his fire spirit to the creation of the others, or the eviction of the others from the weirwood net, which is the same thing. And that's why the others have this cold fire. It's because like they're the children of Azor Ahai in a sense. And that's why Jon as an ice dragon is a cool parallel to the others. His dad is a dragon, just as the others were created by Azor Ahai, a dragon. You follow me? Oh, Visenya is a Night's Queen figure. Who is her kid? It's Maegor the Cruel. So Maegor the Cruel is a monster, easily could be seen as paralleling the others, the worst side of the others. So there you go. That is creating a White Walker. That's how you do it. That's all the ingredients. That's pretty dope, right? I'm giving you answers. Oh, we're almost done too. We're getting down to it. So I think that there is something a little deeper here as far as the exiled weirwood net. Remember I said the others' bodies need a sacrifice. Now it's babies to sustain them. Where did the original bodies come from? Well, it was probably the last hero's 12 dead companions who were sacrificed. And I think that was all part of a Green Man watch at the Nightfort. And I did a whole video about this recently called the Green Man at the Nightfort or something like that. So I'll try to summarize this quickly. This is my favorite new theory that I've come up with. One thing about my timeline heresy. Let's back up a little bit. We're going to talk about the pact. So look, the Hammer of the Waters is a moon meteor. I just proved that in my awesome Hammer of the Waters video. And I've also proved it in the Lightbringer video. I've not seen any other theory that makes any goddamn sense, except for the Children of the Forest really just caused an earthquake, which is a direct reading of the myth. So if the Hammer of the Waters was a moon meteor, which it was, in the story, the pact follows closely after. So if you move the Hammer of the Waters in the timeline to the fall of the long night, then you have the humans, first men, making a pact with the Children of the Forest during the long night. And this makes all the sense in the world. It makes so much sense. It's one of my favorite things about all of my theory crafting that I've done as far as like coming up with a more sensible interpretation of the timeline and the myth. This is it. Why did the first men adopt the religion of the Children of the Forest? And why do the first men of the Night's Watch all swear their oaths to weirwoods? I will protect, I will defend, I will this, I will that, sworn to the Greenseers in the weirwood trees. We're told the Children of the Forest helped the first men of the Watch assemble and fight the others, and they helped the last hero. So this is a good reason for the first men to adopt the children's religion, which means practicing worship of the weirwoods and all that. It's because the children helped men survive the long night. And the pact that the children and the first men made was also the same pact that created the Night's Watch, or modified it. It's where the humans swore to the children, okay, we'll defend the realms of men against the others. Just, since you've helped us do that, helped us stand up against them, this is what we will do. And in fact, if the Greenseers were resurrecting these first men of the Watch, then they owed the Greenseers their very lives. And I think that's what is being acted out in the scene where Jon and Sam kneel as green boys and rise as men of the Watch in black. I think it's all a resurrection ceremony where green men are killed and then they're resurrected and they rise as green zombies of the Watch. Interestingly, the one who gives Jon his oath when he rises as a man of the Watch is Bowen Marsh, the same man who kills Jon in a different scene. So if you superimpose the scenes, which is something George wants us to do sometimes, you'd have Bowen Marsh killing Jon as a green boy and then saying rise again as a man of the Watch in front of a weirwood tree. Bowen Marsh, the pomegranate, who's a symbol of remaining in the underworld. So the pact heresy dictates that the formation of the Watch is part of the pact between the humans and the children. The pact supposedly was struck on the Isle of Faces. And what did they do on the Isle of Faces? They formed the Sacred Order of Green Men to watch over the weirwoods. So it says it right there. When they signed the pact, they formed a watch to watch the weirwoods, a watch of green men. What are green men? I don't know, but they might be those resurrected skinchangers that we're talking about. Or they just might be resurrected green men or first men with the blood of Garth the Green, who was a green man. So they're hybrids. Something. But yeah, that's it. So when we go back to now Night King, this is Nightfort heresy time. So we've got this pact. The first men are now following the lead of the children because that's how they are surviving. The Night's Watch has been formed from these green men that I think Azor Ahai slaughtered, essentially. So the Green Man Watch. This is Nightfort heresy. So we know the pact spells out that a Green Man Watch is created on the Isle of Faces to watch over weirwoods. So this introduces the idea that that's what green men do. They watch over weirwoods, and sometimes the specific watch is formed to watch over weirwoods. Now, the oldest castle of the Night's Watch is the Nightfort. And it is said to be the first castle on the wall, but we don't know when the wall was built. And in my heretical opinion, the order goes like this. Weirwood organism exists first because those are eternal. Then someone comes and builds a castle around it because that's what the first men did. And then the location of the wall is dictated by the location of the Nightfort and the weirwood organism, and the wall is built from the Nightfort out. The location of the wall has to be dictated by the Nightfort weirwood because the Nightfort weirwood is just too damn weird and unique as an organism. It is the only talking face we've ever seen, and that thing is 100 feet down underground with a weirwood above ground pushing up. So you can really see what's going on here. Probably that castle was built around the weirwood in order to keep watch over it. Just as a Green Man Watch was formed on the Isle of Faces, the Night's Watch was probably a Green Man Watch from the Nightfort. So, the Night's King was the 13th man to lead the watch. And everybody thinks, not everybody, but a lot of people, thinks that means that Night's King lived after the Long Night. 13th man to lead the watch. Watch dates from the Long Night. Well, if there was a Green Man Watch at the Nightfort already, watching over the weirwoods, and then Azor Ahai comes along and co-ops that watch. He's got partners too, so maybe the 13th man to lead the watch is his partner or somebody who he body snatches. Maybe Azor Ahai is a member of this Green Man Watch. There's a few different permutations of this. But the 13th man to lead the watch, that's going to be how this works. That's how the Night's King lives at the beginning of the Long Night. He is taking control of this Green Man Watch at the Nightfort. When it says that he bound his brothers with strange sorceries, that is a part of the creation of the others. Okay, so now he is taking control of this Green Man Watch. He's binding his brothers with sorceries. Essentially, these green men are being sacrificed in order to power this dark magic. And then the hive mind of the weirwood net is essentially ripped out and turned into the others. You can spin this different ways based on how much you think is accidental and how much is causal and who you think did what. So maybe Azor Ahai invades the weirwood net, not knowing that it would create the others, and the others are like a side effect. Or maybe Night's Queen is in the weirwood net, she takes Azor Ahai the invader and turns the tables and uses his energy to create White Walkers to fight his other Dragon Lord minions. That might be it too. And that's very close to the children creating the White Walkers to fight the First Men. It's Night's Queen creating White Walkers to fight the Great Empire of the Dawn Dragon Lords. You see what I mean? It's very similar. It's just more complicated and nuanced, and not something you can explain without doing a 7-hour theory iceberg. So, yeah, the Nightfort face isn't carved. It's magical. That seems to be right. It's animated at least. And it's not bleeding. It's just milky. The eyes are blind and milky white, but they're not bleeding. That is an important difference. So, I think when Night's King is the 13th man to lead the watch, that's referring to the Green Man watch at the Nightfort. And there was probably 12 of them, and he just killed them. So there's an important Euron Red, or Urathon, no, it's Euron Red Hand, an ancient king of the Ironborn. He holds a king's moot at Naga's Ribs, which are weirwood, petrified weirwood boat hull. We've talked about that. Naga's Ribs are weirwood ribs. They look like the trunks of pale trees. And Euron Red Hand, it's nicknamed the Red Hand. Remember, the weirwood leaves look like bloody hands, red bloody hands. So Euron the Red Hand King, inside of this weirwood circle of Naga's Ribs, he kills 13 kings. And a bunch of priests as well. And Naga's ribs run red with blood. So to me, Euron Red Hand. The name Euron obviously parallels Euron Greyjoy, who is a dark Azor Ahai Night's King figure. Red Hand tells you this is weirwood sacrifice, Naga's ribs, substitute weirwood trees, essentially. If you imagine what is being spelled out here, you have Azor Ahai killing 13 kings, or priests, or priest kings, or holy men, green men, if you will. 13 of them, and offering their blood to the weirwoods. So that's the last hero and his 12 being killed in front of the weirwood trees right before they're resurrected. That is essentially my theory. And that's a pretty good analog to it. All right, so that is my Nightfort heresy, essentially, that Night's King bound the Green Brothers of the Green Watch at the Nightfort and created the others from them. And then I think their bodies were essentially resurrected and transformed into the Watch. So that is why the Watch and the others seem like mirror images. They both have origins in this same event at the Nightfort, where green men were sacrificed and White Walkers were created, and then Night's Watchmen were created. So that's the shit, man. Nightfort. That's where it goes down. So how do we fix this? Given everything that we just talked about, how do we solve the problem of the books? We know that there is bound to be a more complex answer than we have to kill the others. George has been implying that forever, and everything about the books implies that. The name Others is a tie-in to one of George's themes, which is otherization. The wildlings are people, just like the First Men and the people that live on the other side of the wall, but they have been otherized. There's been a border wall built. You're the keep out people, the unwanted ones, and all kinds of stories are told about them. So it's very easy to see, like, this idea of the others trapped on the other side of the wall and the otherized wildlings. It's parallel. So what does that tell you? Like, the answer to this is not to kill the ones who have been otherized. Oh, we just need to genocide the others with the right magic weapons, and then we save the day. It's obviously not the story, because that doesn't work with the thematic commentary of the others. Jon helps reconcile the wildlings to Westeros, right? He says, they're people just like us. Actually, I've been among them, and since the ice demons are coming, we're going to go ahead and get all the people on this side of the wall. So he is beginning to reconcile these otherized people to the realm. It's a very important theme, otherization and reconciliation. That's why the whole harmonization of opposites with all the magic, ice and fire, light and dark, being harmonized, morning star, even star, winter and summer, they've all got to work together in a cycle that's smooth and complementary. That's life. Day and night, winter and summer. Like I said, it's all the cycles of life. The long night interrupts all the cycles, you know, the day-night cycle, the cycle of the seasons, and the cycle of life and death. So the others, we don't need to just break them with dragon glass. And that's why You can tell that the TV show did not understand the purpose of the White Walkers, and all they saw was ice demons and magic weapons. And in the end, Bran's knowledge about the Night King and their creation by the Children of the Forest in show canon rather, it didn't come into play. It didn't matter. All they did was stab the Night King, and all the others came undone because Night King made the others. That's all they did. So we know the answer to the others will not be just popping them with dragon glass or Valyrian steel. That just isn't going to be it. So what's the more complex answer? Well, you can figure it out. They've been evicted from their tree homes. To the extent that they are the original hive mind of the weirwoods, what do you think we ought to do, guys? Give them their tree homes back, right? So how do we do that? We've got to get the human Greenseer hive mind, which is invasive and parasitic, out of the weirwood net. All of it. Every Greenseer that ever lived, from Azor Ahai to Bloodraven to Bran, all of these humans that have gone into the weirwood net, that entire hive mind has to be ripped out and downloaded into Bran the Downloader. That's his name, not Bran the Builder. He's Bran the Downloader. And we saw an echo of this in the show, where he essentially did download all of the weirwood net. He got part of it in the cave, and then he finished it outside the cave, and then he was done. He didn't need to touch weirwood trees. It was all in there. The more complex version will be that Bran is a receptacle for the entire weirwood net. So that's why he'll be the last Greenseer. And I don't even think he'll have a connection to the weirwoods anymore. He's just going to have all of that knowledge and maybe all those voices too in his head, which is super heavy. But that is what his destiny is. That is his role to play. This will make him the ideal king of Westeros because he will have all this knowledge. So just as he can't have children, and just as there won't be any more tree wizards, the correlation would be that Bran would be the last monarch of Westeros, and that he will transition to a more regional division of power, and him and Sam will spin out an actual history that's accurate and help Westeros advance out of, the Dark Ages, essentially. Someone asked about the Dark Ages. The reason they're in the Dark Ages is so they can get out of them. That's essentially it. So Bran is the last Greenseer. He's going to download the weirwood net. Jon and Dany are probably going to be the ones that chase the others back in, or if one or both of them become a Night's King or Queen, at the end they become frozen. Maybe they lead the others into the weirwood net in death. That could be Dany's destiny. She's always burning slave masters who are like others and setting the wights free and then leading the wights. So maybe Dany is going to, at the very end of her confrontation with the others, she's got a sacrificial death, but in her death, she is essentially freeing all the trapped spirits of the wights. And that way she's leading them into the sort of astral realm. That's what Dany's death is going to be like, When we talk about Dany's magical sacrificial destiny and all the Nissa going into the weirwood net stuff, that's how I think the importance. So there's, in the House of the Undying, Dany is having a dream. Yes, Euron will burn the Citadel. I have a feeling. I agree with that. Protect your data from Bran with a VPN. Nice, great ways, Tim. You're ready to do ads. So in Dany's House of the Undying vision, there is a bit where she sees, it's the very end, she sees 1,000 blood-stained hands reaching up to her. They needed the life and the fire, and she wanted to give herself to them, and so she did. And then the vision morphs into the Undying trying to vampire her. But those 1,000 bloodstained hands later appear as the hands of all the freed slaves who call her Mysa and follow her. But 1,000 bloodstained hands is also what a weirwood canopy looks like from above, because all their leaves look like bloodstained hands. So if you were falling into a weirwood canopy, it would look like 1,000 bloodstained hands reaching up to you. And Dany is in the House of the Undying with their undying trees that symbolize weirwoods, and the others are right there, and she's right next to this cold blue heart, which is like the heart of winter. So I think Dany will go into the heart of winter. Her and Drogon will burn others and wights, but then she's also going to have some part of going into the weirwood net and setting all of these souls that are magically held captive, setting them free, just as she has freed slaves through her whole arc. So it'll be a really incredible parallel of her themes and actions with people, with the wights and the others. So she will burn the others. She will free the wights. And that's Born to Burn the Others is the video for that. So everybody has a part to play. Bran downloads and empties the trees out. Jon and Dany are going to have to put them back in the trees and subdue them, in the meantime. And then we're all working together. Can't wait to read that when I'm 80 years old. I don't know how old you are, but hopefully not. Okay, so that is the end of the iceberg, but I have bonus action for you. I've got a couple of bonus ones. So that's like where this all leads to. What do the others want, and how do we give it to them, and how do we save the day? That's what it amounts to, is we have to give them their tree homes back. So a couple of things I didn't cover. How's the wall going to fall? In the show, it was the ice dragon. And it's not going to happen like this in the books, but this was damn cool. You have to admit. This was one of the coolest things Game of Thrones did. Watching the ice dragon at the end of the season fly up and just start burning, destroying the wall with its blue fire, whatever it was. It was sick. Loved it. Now, in the books, it will be something different. So, could it be magic horns? The Horn of Jormungand is suggested to bring down the wall. I talked about how Dragonbinder could be the thing that calls a comet, and that could break down the wall. Jon's body, I said, is tied to the fall of the wall. So maybe the others stealing his body will somehow trigger this magic. I think it still needs a physical element. But I already talked about that, how Jon's resurrection is tied to the fall of the wall. And I think they need Jon's body to sort of lead them through. Jon Brown's army goes marching on, right? Isn't that how it goes? And then the idea of the ice dragons breaking the wall is basically a parallel to a comet or a moon meteor from the ice moon. So even that is kind of oddly similar. It will be a big ice dragon. So there's some foreshadowing for this. Like, for example, Stannis and Jon have these scenes over the map of northern Westeros. And they've got candles holding down the corners of the map. There's two things that happen. One of the candles melts and the wax starts oozing out like a glacier over the frozen north and onto Westeros. So that sort of suggests that the wall will be partially melted, like a melted glacier. Because, like I said, the wall looks like a glacier. So as Jon and Stannis are looking at the map, like gods looking down on the land, there's a glacier melting. And then I forget which is in which order, but Stannis also takes his Lightbringer sword and, threatening Jon, lays it across the wall on the map. Now, obviously, the Lightbringer sword is a major symbol for a comet, the red comet. So, or, a moon meteor. So the idea of Stannis laying his sword down on the wall really sounds like a comet or meteor hitting the wall, which would melt it and cause it to, pool like a glacier. A lot of it would be vaporized instantly. So, yeah, I think the foreshadowing for the giant ice sword that breaks the wall is all over the place. And you heard it here first. First and last and in between. The winds of winter should end with the fall of the long night, which means we will see a new apocalyptic comet, meteor, moon disaster. The horn, I bet you Dragonbinder will be involved in calling it. I really do think so. And I think that's the true horn of winter, essentially, is Dragonbinder. Or maybe Sam's horn calls the comet. And that's in that way that is Dragonbinder. All the horns all parallel each other, so I can't figure out which one does what. But one of them damn horns is going to be the horn of winter by calling a dragon comet. So, I don't know. Maybe play them together. Symphony. Song of Ice and Fire. Both horns. Yeah. Are the others aliens? They kind of come across like visitors. This artwork is by Lee Moyer, and they look like aliens here. They also have the reflective ice armor, but they have the star eyes, and they're called Watchers. I talked about the Nephilim and how the others are kind of like icy Nephilim. The Nephilim are angels that come down to Earth and breed with men. And the others have star eyes. So are they from space somehow? I just said they're green man spirits ripped out of the weirwood net, so how would they be from space? Well, let me tell you. Here's how that works. The Bloodstone Emperor worshipped a black stone, which was, seemingly, a moon meteor that fell at the time of the long night. And it is connected to the oily black stone. It is a magic rock. The Bloodstone Emperor is Azor Ahai, I believe. Same guy who comes to Westeros. This may be the meteor that Dawn is made out of, Or it may be a meteor that a different black sword is made out of. But there is a meteor sword in the hands of Azor Ahai, and he's the one that invades the weirwood net and drives out the others, or gives his spirit and seed to Night's Queen to make the others. So, was Azor Ahai possessed by an alien spirit, a Lovecraftian alien spirit, that rode to Planetos on the back of that red comet? The red comet is super duper Lovecraftian, and in Lovecraft, definitely entities can ride to Earth on the backs of meteors and stars and things. So maybe a spirit, the Great Other, some sort of alien entity, has invaded the planet by means of these meteors. And that is part of the energy that is animating the others by way of Azor Ahai, who worships the black stone and might be possessed by it. So that is the sense in which the others are visitors. And I do think Martin is trying to imply that layer, but not strongly, just for fun. So that is the sense in which the others are from space. Like I said, they are spelled out as moon children because their mother was a hamster. Their mother was a moon pale magic woman. So symbolically, they are moon children with stars in their eyes. So perhaps, again, the meteors that landed on Earth, that's not the red comet. That's the red comet crashing into the moons and, moon meteors. That's what's landing on Earth. So the others being the children of a moon maiden, like that, they might be connected to that meteor. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if there's a black, oily stone in the heart of winter. Even in the show, we saw black stone obelisks around that weirwood tree. I don't know if they just threw them there or if that was something George mentioned, but in the heart of winter, I do expect to find black stone, probably oily black stone, and a frozen weirwood tree. That's what we should find, and so that will strengthen the idea that some part of what's animating the others is an oily black stone. So, who was Night's Queen? Maybe who was that first ice sorceress? Maybe she wandered too far into the heart of winter and found a meteor that landed there. Or, you know what I mean? Like maybe that's where ice magic comes from, is this perversion of the land that comes from this black stone. So I do think if we go to the heart of winter and see black stone, we'll get to theorize about some connections that it could have to like raising the dead and necromancy and all that stuff. Because the necromancy does seem like a twisted form of skin changing. It's, the skin changing is astral projection, and the others are animating the dead. They're controlling the dead just like humans are controlling animals, or kind of like that. And that's another clue that the others are Greenseers that are transformed. So there's a lot of power that's needed to do all this transformation magic. Maybe it's all blood sacrifice and weirwood magic, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was some oily black stone involved somewhere too. And neither would Tim in the chat. Oily black stone sword stabbed in the eye of the weirwood at the heart of winter. That'd be sick, Tara. Draw it. Somebody draw it. Okay, so one last bonus slide and then I can go slap Cleo around. Feed her food. No, that was it actually. Yeah, this is the ice dragon. I already did this one. Just, are ice dragons real? Oh, there is one thing I forgot. So I said that they are, the maesters say that maybe they exist in the Shivering Sea, or maybe those are just tales, but it sounds like Adara's ice dragon. Well, the last thing I didn't mention is that, so ice dragons melt when slain, right? And at the end, spoiler alert, but the ice dragon in the story, eventually ends up melting. And it becomes a pond, a cold black pond on Adara's farm. And Adara's farm is a stand-in for Winterfell, very obviously and clearly. And so in Winterfell's Godswood, we find a mysterious cold black pond. And it's very weird because there's hot springs all throughout Winterfell. All the springs are hot and muddy and bubbly. But then there's this cold black pond, and it's deep. Remember, Osha the Wildling dives down and says, I don't know if I can find the bottom. It's at least deep enough for her to dive into it. So this cold black pond that's suggested as bottomless, why is it there? What is it? Why? Like, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't fit in this hot, steaming Godswood, the cold black pond. What is it? Well, like I said, the ice dragon melts in that story and leaves a cold black pond on Adara's farm, which feels very like Winterfell. So that is either literally a melted ice dragon in Winterfell's Godswood, or it's just a shout out, meaning it's a most supposed to make us think of Adara's Pond, but it doesn't actually have an explanation, and there isn't an ice dragon that's going to raise out of that pond. But I do want to point it out. It's a very tempting correlation, and I hope George does something with the pond so that we know. So, boom. That's how you do an iceberg, ladies and gentlemen, in 2 parts when your stream dies on the first part. So we even got a new Grey Waste Stark theory. We got a couple bonus theories today. I hope you guys enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun for me. Definitely yesterday and today. Tons of fun. I really love this stuff. I am thinking about more topics to do iceberg style presentations on. I talked to you about, maybe a Lovecraftian / Squisher one with Tim. Definitely do a Valerian Targaryen iceberg. I'll do Stark's one, which will include everything else in the north, like the Boltons and all that. And if you like what I did just now, please consider sending in a PayPal. I'd appreciate that. If very least, leave a comment on the stream. Please share it with other people. Click the like button.